Go warm. I'll see you again soon.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12 noon. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday lunchtime. Boris chucks in another hand grenade. He tells the COVID-19 inquiry he'll bypass the government and hand all his material over directly to them. He says he's not willing for his material to become a legal test case after the Cabinet Office launches a judicial review. It's not a witch hunt. The chair of the Commons Culture Committee says their hearing into the This Morning scandal is a significant matter. Dame Caroline Dinenage says it's all about protection in public service broadcasting. As Philip Schofield says, he's now lost everything. And they're off, but so are the trains. As the Derby weekend starts in Epsom, 100,000 racegoers struggling to get to the trackside as the rail minister accuses the unions of a coordinated attempt to disrupt summer plans. But will the protesters manage to make it trackside? And Blooming Lovely will bring you the haunting sight of the Florida ghost orchid, one of the world's rarest plants which has burst into flower at Kew after a carefully orchestrated transatlantic flight. First, though, the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has confirmed he is sending his unredacted WhatsApp messages directly to the COVID-19 inquiry. In his letter to its chairwoman, Baroness Hallett, he wrote, "I'd like to do the same with any material that may be on an old phone, which I've previously been told I can no longer access safely." It comes after the government argued it shouldn't have to hand over what it calls irrelevant material. Ministers are preparing for a legal battle with the inquiry. A preliminary hearing will be held on Tuesday. Philip Schofield says he's lost everything after revelations of his affair with a younger male colleague, but insists he didn't groom him. In his first interview since leaving ITV, Schofield told the BBC he's broken and ashamed and he'll forever be sorry. He's hit out at criticism, calling it relentless, and warned of its catastrophic effect on his mind, even questioning if people want him to die. He suggested that homophobia could be behind some of the backlash.
If it was a heterosexual relationship, then, it would have been a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If it's a gay relationship, then suddenly it raises eyebrows. It's wrong. It's wrong. People do find each other attractive in different age groups. I mean, it does happen, but it's the mere fact that this is so gigantic. And I appreciate the workplace and and the history. I get that, but it's the fact that it's so massive is predominantly homophobia.
Rail passengers face continued travel disruption with a fresh wave of strikes today. Members of the RMT union across England have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. General Secretary Mick Lynch paid tribute to RMT members, saying they're determined to keep on fighting.
Well, we won't ever get full support, but we do get good support from the public. We don't get abused. We got people who are obviously unhappy about their train service being disrupted. But I think many people now understand what's going on in our society, that people need a pay rise. They need a square deal from their employers. And they're tired of this continuous austerity and not being able to pay their bills. So I think we've got quite a lot of sympathy.
A man arrested following the deaths of 2 young swimmers off Bournemouth Beach has been released under investigation. A 12-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy died after being pulled from the sea on Wednesday afternoon. A pleasure boat called the Dorset Belle has been impounded and is reportedly being placed under the guard of Poole Harbour. The man in his 40s, who was on the water at the time but not known to the youngsters, had been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. A blood test that can detect more than 50 different types of cancer has shown promise in a trial involving thousands of NHS patients. The Galleri test correctly revealed cancer 66% of the time during the trial. It's also able to pinpoint where in the body the disease is coming from with 85% accuracy. The test, which is currently available in the US, doesn't detect all cancers and won't replace NHS screening programmes. Well, that is almost 35,000 more patients a month are waiting longer than 2 weeks for a follow-up appointment after being told they might have cancer. That's according to Labour, which says the government can no longer blame waiting lists on COVID pandemic backlogs. A government spokesperson says the NHS is recruiting a record number of doctors and nurses and investing an extra £45.6 billion in health and social care. British Airways has been fined almost £1 million by the US government over claims it failed to pay refunds for cancelled flights during the pandemic. The US Transportation Department says the airline didn't provide timely refunds to passengers for abandoned or rescheduled flights to and from the country. It says it received more than 1,200 complaints about the airline. BA rejects the claims, saying it acted lawfully at all times. And staying with the US, a White House spokesperson says US President Joe Biden is fine following his fall on stage. The 80-year-old tripped over a sandbag and fell to the ground at a graduation ceremony at the US Air Force Academy in Colorado. He was helped back up by 3 people and made his way to his seat unassisted, if no doubt a little shaken following the incident. And arrests have been made after a 12-week-old donkey went missing for 2 weeks. The foal, called Moon, disappeared from Miller's Ark Animals Farm in Hampshire on the 15th of May. After a public appeal earlier this week, Moon was finally reunited with its mother. A 17-year-old man and a 38-year-old man from Buckinghamshire have been arrested on suspicion of theft. What a cute little donkey. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Mark with GB News Live.
Not drop the dead donkey, drop the live donkey. Thank you very much indeed, Rhiannon, and welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Boris Johnson appears to have blown apart the government's efforts to challenge the COVID-19 inquiry and its launching of a judicial review. The former Prime Minister telling the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, in this letter that he will hand over all his unredacted material directly to her. Well, the Cabinet Office had been arguing that much of the material should remain confidential because it was, quote, unambiguously irrelevant. They'd launched the legal challenge, which will get underway with the hearing on Tuesday. We're joined in the studio for the latest now with our political reporter, Olivia Utley. And Olivia, it's not just the fact that he's will hand over this unreservedly. It's what he said in doing so. I'm not willing to let my material become a test case. It seems to be a direct challenge to this judicial review.
Well, absolutely. So there are 2 possible reasons why the government has been so reluctant to hand over these WhatsApp messages. One is that there is a sitting minister who doesn't want something that they said in these WhatsApp messages to get into the public domain. That's a sort of more exciting reason. It seems relatively unlikely that that is the reason because, of course, the COVID inquiry is expected to last for years. And so if any messages were to get into the public domain, it wouldn't be for a long time, well after the next general election. The other option is that ministers, which is what the government is arguing, ministers simply don't want to set this precedent of inquiries being allowed to access all sorts of private, confidential WhatsApp messages. And that is the principle by which the government was planning to take the case to judicial review.
Right, so it's the question of precedent, even though Baroness Hallett, of course, who knows the law backwards, says, no, it's for me to decide what is actually going to be relevant in this case.
Absolutely, and it's not just Baroness Hallett that says that. A number of eminent lawyers have now been asked for their opinion on whether the government would have a strong case at judicial review, and all of them have said no. Lord Sumption, former High Court judge, very, very eminent lawyer, has said that he doesn't think the government has a case at all because it agreed to the terms of the inquiry, and in those terms, Baroness Hallett's remit is very, very wide. She's essentially been told she can see whatever she likes. So it does seem very strange that the government was willing to take this case to judicial review, but it seems that Boris Johnson, as you say, has blown that apart.
Yeah, and when Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was questioned by reporters on this, he came back with this same line, I think it was 8 times. Basically, we are confident and so on and so forth. I mean, is there something that the political lobby group think, is lurking in there somewhere that could be embarrassing to the government?
Well, why Rishi Sunak seems so confident that he has a good legal case, it seems, is because of this line that James Eadie, the government's top lawyer, keeps saying, that the danger in these messages getting out is that they could compromise government collective responsibility. So the way that the cabinet in this country operates is they come up with an agreed line on any given position and will all say the same line, but behind the scenes they should be allowed to have a robust debate about what's the correct course of action to take, then come to an agreement which they present as a unified front to the country. But the danger is that if their private WhatsApp messages are allowed to get out, then will they feel free and able to have those frank discussions with each other without the risk that they'll be pushed into the spotlight?
Yeah, the problem with that, which other lawyers have pointed out, is that this is not a cabinet minute. This is not the discussion within the cabinet when that is supposed to be allowed to take place. This is direct communications between others outside the cabinet room.
Exactly, which gets the crux of the problem, really. For a long time now, government ministers have done kind of government by WhatsApp and communicated in these very, very unofficial channels. And some are saying, you know, if you live by the government by WhatsApp sword, you have to die by it too. If you're going to have these casual conversations not by the proper means of communication, then you've got to accept the consequences.
Live or die by WhatsApp. Well, there's the thing. Olivia, as ever, thank you. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in the week to come, as we will on our other running story, of course, the former This Morning presenter Philip Schofield breaking his silence with 2 interviews, not just one, claiming he has lost everything. Well, speaking to both the BBC and the Sun newspaper, he said he feels like a victim of hate, believing his television career is now over. He's also been dropped by yet another brand in a diminishing list of commercial deals and sponsorships. Well, meanwhile, the chair of the Commons Culture and Media Select Committee, to question the ITV bosses next week, has said they are not involved in a witch hunt, Dame Caroline Dinenage saying they had to address significant matters involving protection of public service broadcasting. Let's get more now with our news reporter Ray Addison joining us in the studio, who, of course, has been following the story throughout the week at Television Centre, lucky man. It's been a bit of a soap opera of its own, hasn't it? But now, at long last, we've got it from the horse's mouth. And people are just wondering why Schofield has actually broken cover now before ITV held their own meetings and the Culture Committee has held its own meeting.
Yeah, one must wonder if that was perhaps a bit of a mistake. Perhaps wait and see what comes out of this committee, this Culture Committee hearing and meeting, and then and also, you know, what else breaks in terms of co-presenters, something, whatever Holly might say when she goes back on Monday morning, and then react to that. Now, you could argue that by doing these interviews today with The Sun and with the BBC, all he's done is actually fuel the fires and give people a lot more to talk about while we wait for these other sources to come through.
Yeah, I mean, we've been sort of treating it to a degree like a showbiz story, but it's interesting now that we have Dame Caroline Dinenage, who'll be chairing this Culture and Media Sport Committee, I think, on Tuesday. This is a significant matter. It covers issues around whistleblowing and a specific issue within ITV. It's also concerning a matter of protection for public service broadcasters. I mean, that enters a different dimension, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Tuesday week when this is going to be taking place, and she says it's a fundamental issue now of safeguarding, a duty of care towards staff. How did ITV approach that? What kind of workplace culture did the ITV executives foster? And has there been a potential abuse of power? This is what Dame Caroline says that she wants to get to the bottom of with this committee meeting. She says she described Philip Schofield as a god of broadcasting. She said he's got phenomenal power. I guess she's talking more generally about people who are at the top of their game as a broadcaster, as he was, and questioning what could result from that and how much oversight or overlook is there of how those people then behave and the decisions that they make.
Yeah. And, of course, I guess the other question is, in terms of addressing that to Schofield himself with his comments in these interviews, I feel a victim of hate after this event.
Yeah, absolutely. And he admitted himself in that interview that he will probably get lambasted for saying that. You know, to many people who have been following this story, you know,
He's not the victim.
He's not the victim.
Yeah.
And he's been very clear as well, to be fair. You know, he feels very sorry that this young man has been caught up in this. He takes complete responsibility for it. However, one must also say that this young man, as Philip has stressed, was an adult at the time, 20
years old, he asserted, yeah.
Exactly.
And are we likely to hear from that individual? Because clearly we are still awaiting to see what the Sunday papers do this weekend. Suggestions he may have signed some kind of NDA, even though Schofield's saying, I didn't make him sign something.
Yeah, Schofield's completely denying that any kind of NDA was signed. In terms of the young man himself, Schofield very clear that as far as he's concerned, and he said he spoke to him 2 weeks ago, he doesn't want any publicity, wants to maintain his privacy, asking people to respect that.
Yeah.
However, story like this, that kind of shying back from the press probably won't last for very long.
Yeah, he'll have to obviously explain his side of the story, literally. Yeah,
and he may well want to do that.
Yeah. Ray, thank you for that. And, of course, we'll see, as we say, what emerges over the weekend. And then Monday morning, we just talked about Holly Willoughby. Well, she could be seen as heartless when she returns to the programme on Monday. That's according, at least, to a leading business psychologist, Mamta Saho, who joins us now. Why would you take that assessment, bearing in mind, on face value, she's actually done nothing wrong?
So I think the British nation need to heal. They are devastated by this story. They're devastated by the claims that the angels, Holly and Phil, have come up as being honest to the nation. And I think that if Holly gives it a bit of time, then she will give the nation some time to heal after the rupture that's been caused.
Time to heal. All it is a daytime programme. I mean, this is not actually life and death, is it?
I can appreciate that, Mark, but, the nation is bought into this programme. They have developed this emotional loyalty to This Morning. They wake up with their coffee to Phil and Holly, and they feel invested in them. Now, they may not know Phil and Holly personally, but they feel like they do, because they are such good presenters. They have touched the hearts of the nation. And so that is a big responsibility, to have touched the hearts of the nation. People are feeling shocked with the outcomes. They're feeling shocked by the fact that this has happened. So they need time to build their trust again, because their trust has been broken.
Well, is it the case that if a trust is broken, that means the programme is broken? And as Diane Nelms, of course, who started the programme all those years ago, suggested, perhaps it's time now to move on and start again afresh?
So I think This Morning as an entity is much bigger than the presenters that present it. And I say that with the utmost respect. It's a brand that has been going for years and years and years. And I think this is not to boo-boo This Morning. It's to say that the presenters who come onto This Morning have a massive amount of responsibility to the nation, because they're ultimately waking up and serving the nation every day. These are cultured presenters, people who know how to touch the hearts and souls of the layman they're watching with their morning breakfast. And I think that that's a big responsibility. I don't think that This Morning should stop now because of the Phil and Holly case. That would be so unfortunate. And I think people are expecting to see This Morning come back onto their screens again. However, Holly has to take some responsibility. That there's a bit of, she has portrayed this closeness to Phil. She's shown that they're buddies. He came out to her on the sofa, absolutely cried on her shoulders. How could she have claimed that she didn't really know much about what was going on?
So it's a team game, in other words. Well, therefore, what do you make of Dame Caroline Dynage's sort of revelations, if you like, before the Culture and Media Committee meet? A significant matter of concern, matters concerning whistleblowing, and here's the interesting part, a matter of protection for public service broadcasters. So it's not just about the two individuals, it's about the way that people are treated within broadcasting.
Now that, Mark, is an absolutely important issue that we shouldn't dismiss here, and neither should it be blended in with the Phil and Holly case. And I think Phil, in his vulnerable state right now, is maybe feeling the heaviness of all of that. But that is very separate, as Ray has just indicated. I think that matters around the whistleblowing, around the power and the influence that these individuals have absolutely must be looked at and scrutinised. And if it comes out as though there's been some mistreatment or some things that should, that are not PC, and certain individuals have had more privilege and power than others and use that to the detriment of the nation or of the show, then absolutely that should be looked at, questioned, and then addressed.
So therefore, what about Schofield himself, who said he has lost everything? He even came out with a rather extraordinary quote. I think I understand how Caroline Flack felt, which I think may probably anger Caroline's family. But clearly, there is a matter to be addressed in terms of his position as well.
100%. Now, my heart broke when I heard that. This is a sign of someone who is absolutely desperate. It sounds to me like he hasn't got that much psychological support around him. He is feeling humiliated, absolutely exposed and unsupported. And that is not okay. And I think we do need to pay attention to that and we should not take the comments around suicide lightheartedly. Now, and I hope that he cultivates the right support around him and the right guidance to be able to heal from this himself, because nobody likes to be exposed, nobody likes to be abandoned and left, and his world has changed overnight, so he's going to have gone through so much psychologically, emotionally, spiritually and mentally. So yes, those comments should not be taken lightheartedly. We should pay attention to it. Media outlets need to pay attention to it. However, we should not allow those comments at the same time to override the concerns that have come out from everything that might be going on at this morning when it comes to people abusing their power and status.
Well, we'll see what emerges with the various inquiries going on. But Mamta, for the moment, thank you for updating us with your assessment of the continuing soap opera, as someone described it. Coming up, we're trackside at Epsom. Yes, it's Derby weekend underway, but there could be many non-runners, perhaps. Yes, the train strike's bringing the country to a halt as 100,000 try to get down to the Epsom Downs. First, an update on the weather if you're heading to the racetrack.
Hello, it's another dry day across the country on Friday with lots of sunshine developing after what was a fairly cloudy morning for some of us. And in that sunshine, I think it will feel pleasantly warm. If we look at the pressure pattern then, you can see high pressure still centred towards the northwest of the country. That's where it's been for most of this week. And with that high pressure, we're seeing winds coming clockwise around that. So that's what's brought in that cloud from the North Sea through the morning. But much of that has continued to burn back towards the east coast. Here it will still stay fairly cloudy, a bit of mistiness across some eastern coastal areas through the afternoon. But for most areas, look at this, it's a fine picture, lots of sunshine to come, dry for all of us, but it will still stay quite breezy down across southern coastal parts and down the North Sea coast as well. But in that sunshine inland, it should feel pleasantly warm once again. Temperatures down a little bit compared to yesterday across some parts of England and Wales, but still highs 19 to 21, still cooler down that North Sea coast though. Through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight, we'll stay dry for all of us, largely clear skies developing, but we could see some low cloud and stratus developing across parts of England and Wales, with one or two mist and fog patches as well. But under those largely clear skies, it will turn chilly once again. Temperatures falling widely into single figures, but in some rural spots falling fairly close to freezing across, say, parts of northern England. So a chilly end to the night here. But we get off to a fine start for most of us on Saturday morning. Lots of sunshine from the word go. Any cloud tending to break up through the morning. But through the day, we could start to see some cloud effect in the very far north of Scotland. Here, though, it should stay dry. But elsewhere, as I said, a fine picture, lots of sunshine. And in that sunshine, it should feel warmer for many of us compared to Friday. We're looking at highs across England and Wales, 21 to 23. Temperatures still, though, quite suppressed down that North Sea coast. As we head through the rest of Saturday then into the evening and overnight, more of the same. It will stay dry, largely clear skies, so that would make it turn quite chilly once again. But we could start to see some low clouds starting to spread in across some eastern coastal areas once again. And then through the rest of the weekend, into the early part of next week, it will stay dry, lots more sunshine to come. And once again, in that sunshine, it should feel warm. I'll see you again soon.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different.
It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the Epsom Derby meeting underway today, and worries that the two-day festival may be disrupted both by train strikes and animal rights protesters. Of course, the Grand National at Aintree disrupted back in April by Animal Rising, and they've claimed that they're trying to assemble 100,000 or 1,000 rather protesters to disrupt tomorrow's Derby Day race. But the Jockey Club granted a High Court injunction to try to tackle any protests. Well, let's join our national reporter now, Paul Hawkins, who's down at the course on Epsom Downs. And, of course, the other question, Paul, is not just the 1,000 protesters, but the 100,000 racegoers as to whether they're going to be able to get there because of the rail strikes.
At the moment, Mark, you wouldn't even know there's a rail strike on. People are making their way here via car. Look how busy it is on the traffic just surrounding the course at the moment. Loads and loads of people continuing to flock into the course, which opened at 11 o'clock this morning. It's now, just gone 12:30, so there's about an hour and a half until the first race at 2. So many, many people continuing to flood into the ground. So really, the train strikes, yes, they're causing a bit of disruption, but in these modern times, people can work from home and people tend to take the day off if they're coming here anyway. So at the moment, it doesn't appear to be so much of a problem, but looking at those protests, those potential protests tomorrow, that's a different story. Now, we know that Animal Rising, they're an offshoot of XR Rebellion. They're the kind of animal rights wing of XR Rebellion. They've said that they're going to protest tomorrow. They've been talking to the Jockey Club. That's the organisation that owns Epsom Downs. They've been in an ongoing conversation, and the Jockey Club have said, look, out the front, you can actually have your own peaceful protest. So tomorrow there's going to be an alternative Epsom festival with various races, things like the Egg and Spoon race, the Three-Legged Festival. There's going to be a lot of vegan food served. There's going to be their space to protest. So there has been an ongoing conversation between the two groups. But nevertheless, Nevin Truesdale, we're going to hear from him. He's the CEO of the Jockey Club. He said that, look, it's a huge track. It's in the middle of Epsom Downs. Very different to Aintree, where the Grand National is held, which has a lot of fencing around the perimeter. Now, the reason why Animal Rising are protesting protesting is because they believe that horse racing is a cruel sport. They point to the use of whips, they point to the coercion, they point to what they say are numerous deaths within the sport. According to them, a horse dies every other day in British horse racing. They say 20 horses died in May in British horse racing. Louisa Hillwood is from Animal Rising, and she was explaining earlier that there will be that peaceful protest out the front, and there could be more.
There will be a large group of people protesting out the front, yes, and everyone is welcome to join. Please come down. But just like, in Aintree, I'm sure there will be some people who are willing to step in, put their, use their body to prevent harm from coming to these horses. That's really what we want. We love animals. We want to protect them, as well as to start this conversation about how we use animals and how we exploit them and how that doesn't align with loving them. What happened at Aintree, for example, at the Grand National, is that people tried to enter the race course about 20 minutes before it started. There was no race happening. There was no risk to the horses or to any people.
Right, so responding to a number of those claims about the welfare of horses, the British Horse Racing Association, they're the independent body that regulates horse welfare. They're approved by the government. They spend millions and millions and millions of pounds on horse welfare every year, and they point to the fact that 99%, almost 99% of horses come back from every race uninjured. In fact, in 2022, there were 92,000 runners and only one had a whip mark. And that whip, in fact, to be honest, it's kind of an air cushion device. It's designed with consultation from the RSPCA, and in fact the number of horses suffering fatal injuries has decreased to just 0.21% of runners. And when it comes to horse welfare, after the thoroughbred has finished its racing career...
Paul, we're going to interrupt you there because we got an Old Bailey sentencing just coming through. Thank you for that. Back to you a little later. But let's go live to the Old Bailey now. 19-year-old Matthew King being sentenced after admitting to planned terror attacks in London. This is the court hearing.
From the UK to an area of Syria controlled by ISIS to participate in ISIS activities. That would have involved you using serious violence yourself or endangering the lives of others. Also, by the plea, you accept an intention to commit an act of serious violence against the person or endangering the life of a person here in the UK, specifically either a member of the armed forces or a police officer. In the written basis of plea, it is said that you have only carried out a terrorist activity here if your plans to travel to Syria and to join ISIS were frustrated. The prosecution does not accept that part of the basis of plea. Both the prosecution and the defence agree that this aspect of the basis of plea does not make any difference to sentence in this case, as on any view you accept you had an intention to commit made types of terrorist act. From what has emerged from the police investigation, it is clear that you are someone who developed an entrenched Islamist extremist mindset, extreme anti-Western views, and that you intended to commit terrorist acts both in the UK and overseas. At secondary school, you are someone who dabbled in drugs and where your behaviour became more aggressive. You were expelled from school and attended an educational unit in Basildon. Your behaviour deteriorated, and it was noted that you'd often return home stoned and argue with your mother. You moved to other educational units, finally leaving education aged 16 without any qualifications. In 2020, in a conversation between you and your mother, you spoke about finding faith. As you said you would like to visit a mosque, your mother took you to a mosque in Chelmsford. You also watched videos about Islam on YouTube. This appeared at first to have a positive impact on you. Over time, you started to wear more traditional Islamic clothing. You ordered Islamic books and a prayer mat. You were eating only halal food and were learning Arabic. By May 2021, you were attending the Bin Baz Mosque in Stratford. Your family noted your behaviour had become more extreme. They noted you were having conversations online with a girl. You told your mother she was a doctor or a trainee doctor. You also said you wanted to go to Syria with her in order to help people. Some videos you showed your mother were of a concern to her. They showed motivational chanting, people engaged in heated debate at Speaker's Corner. When your mother commented about these having a negative influence on you, you denied it. You became a member of 2 local community online groups using the name of Mahdi Abdulabdi. One group, the Southend Brothers, had 25 to 30 members, and the other, Southend Shura, 6 members. Your mother was concerned at some of the online material you were viewing, as to her it was promoting hatred. When challenged, you denied it, claimed you were watching videos to inform yourself about the history of Islam. You also said you did not believe in terrorism. Your mother, very correctly, made contact with Prevent. In December 2021, you registered as a customer for the Knife Warehouse. Although you signed up for their regular newsletters, you did not place any orders. However, soon afterwards, in January 2022, you carried out searches on the internet for ISIS knife tactical training and ISIS knife tactical training video. I note that the last login to the Knife Warehouse site was on the 3rd of January 2022. In March 2022, you made notes on your phone about detonating homemade bombs. Later in March 2022, you recorded a video at Stratford train station on your mobile. The video shows the back of a uniformed police officer. In other videos, you appear to be noting the location of CCTV cameras. 2 days later, you bought a pair of combat specs, ops glasses, military-style glasses, and military-style combat gloves. In April 2022, you used your phone to record yourself walking near the barracks of the 7th Rifles Regiment with a nasheed promoting violent rhetoric overlaid in the recording. The rhetoric speaks of killing with rage and hate. In April 2022, you made a derogatory comment about Imran Khan, the former Pakistani Prime Minister. Your comment drew condemnation from the Southend Brothers. You then uploaded a video of a still image of a male holding a knife with another nasheed playing in Arabic. As a result, you were reported to the Mosque Committee at the Essex Jam Mosque, and they decided you were no longer welcome and that you would be asked to leave if you attended in the future. You were noted by one of those at the mosque to be talking and on occasion joking about jihad and war. It was noted that your WhatsApp status was changed to "kill the non-Muslims" wherever you see them. Members of the various mosques you attended warned you about your behaviour. On the 25th of April 2022, you searched the internet for Usman Khan and Karim Butt, along with the London Bridge attack. Links to those involved in the terror attacks on London Bridge and Borough Market in 2017 and at Fishmongers Hall in 2019. In May 2022, on a number of occasions, you were seen dressed in an army jacket or bomber jacket. You were expressing views about how to deal with non-believers. Also that month, you recorded yourself reciting words in Arabic, referring to jihad, and there are images of you with captions on the difference between suicide and martyrdom, and with a black flag. There is a video you recorded at Stratford railway station of a police officer in uniform who appears unaware of you. On that video, you can be heard to say the following: "There is another one over there as well." Also in May, you were in conversation online with Miss A. Amongst messages passing between the two of you are comments about taking part in violent jihad in Syria. You write as follows: "When I arrive to the land of martyrs, my goal is to die on the battlefield while trying to kill the kuffar. If you can encourage me to do that, then Abdullah, and I just want to die a martyr." Miss A responded supportively. There were further exchanges between the two of you, and you made the comment, "Let's race for it, inshallah." On the same day as these exchanges, you searched on the internet for Manchester bomber, terror attack, and Streatham attack. The following day, you searched for Salman Abedi on the internet. The same day, you recorded footage of yourself close to Stratford Magistrates Court with 4 uniformed officers by the court building. You later posted an image of the officers on Snapchat with the caption, "Target acquired." A few days later, you searched the internet for jihadi husband and wife. Various chat threads discussed arrested terrorist offenders and likely sentences. Also, on other days in May, there were ongoing chats between you and Miss A. There are references to seeing you in the news, waging war and training for jihad. Miss A is encouraging in her responses. In one message, you write, TBH, I just want to get my hands on an American Marine or a British Marine. Miss A also responds with encouragement to that and in graphic terms. You also sent her an audio message in which you include how you would get two Marines in a room and then to rape each other. There are references to shooting them in the head and eventually beheading them. The chat between the two of you continues about violence and mutilating people. On the 17th of May, having attended the mosque, there is footage taken by you of being close to and by the gates of the barracks of the 7th Rifles Regiment. Your actions that evening appear to be reconnaissance. Later that evening, you make a Google search on your mobile for Jihadi Jack and Jihadi John. In the early hours of the next day, you carried out more internet searches for Salman Abedi and also on 7-Eleven. The police forced entry to your home that morning, the 18th of May 2022, and you were detained and arrested. When arrested, you made a number of comments about your faith. Your phone, laptop and various items were seized, including a black flag, a leaflet on the dangers of ISIS, a notebook with notes both in English and Arabic on religious and philosophical views. You were taken to Basildon Police Station. Whilst there, you showed interest in the tactical vest worn by a police officer, asking if they were bulletproof. You made a number of other concerning statements. When rearrested following a preliminary review of your telephone and its contents on the 19th of May 2022, you observed as follows: I don't believe in the UK law. The only law I believe in is the law of Allah. When interviewed, you gave a prepared statement saying that you had converted from Christianity to Islam and that you developed an interest in Islam by watching YouTube videos. You admitted posting the status update video in April 2022. This was the uploading of the still image of a male holding a knife with a nasheed playing in Arabic. You said the purpose was not to encourage anyone to destroy others. You refer to Kufa in Islam as a metaphor to destroy disbelievers. You wrote the battle is not about the actual battlefield, but rather a battle against the soul, not to sin. You also said that jihad can be translated to mean striving against the wrongful desires of the soul, against the devil, against hypocrites and disbelievers. The person holding the knife in the video is portrayed as a soldier. You challenged some of the assertions in the statements of the police officers in relation to comments it was claimed you'd made on arrest, but you then made no comment responses to all other questions. The police returned to your address on the 25th of May 2022 to conduct a further search. They then found the combat specs, ops glasses, a camouflage baseball cap and combat jacket, training shoes, a black rucksack containing a black balaclava, and a notebook with notes in Arabic on how to gain more Twitter followers, and the tactical gloves. Whilst in police detention, an officer overheard part of a conversation you had with your mother when you spoke about needing to start training if you go to prison. You said this: I'm going to find someone in prison to train me. I need to start to eat more protein. I need to start training offensive and defensive. When I get out, I'm going to be offensive. I'm going to be a machine. I don't care. In my eyes, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not guilty, but I might plead guilty because I will get 30% off my sentence. Allah says he will punish the oppressors. Everywhere will be Sharia law one day. When I get out, they will be controlling me. They probably won't let me have a driving licence because I'll probably run people over. During exercise in the yard a few days later, you made comments while engaging with officers saying you wanted to learn tactical training from an uncle at the mosque, and also, if you know what you're doing with a knife, it doesn't matter if you're small. In relation to martyrdom, it was noted you said as follows: people should be martyrs again and die for what they believe in, and that the tactical training you wish to take part in would have to be taken out of the country in a camp. Turning to the sentencing guidelines, the maximum sentence for a Section 5 offence is one of life imprisonment, or in your case, custody for life. For an offence committed on or after the 29th of June 2021, sentencing involves consideration of the application of the dangerousness provisions and a number of other statutory provisions introduced, including those in the Counter-Terrorism and Sentencing Act 2021 and the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022. The 2021 Act introduced serious terrorism sentences. An offence under Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006 is a serious terrorism offence listed in Schedule 17A of the Sentencing Act 2020. This offence was committed after the 29th of June 2021, and you were over 18 at the time the offence was committed. The first question then is this: is the Court of the opinion that there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by you of further serious terrorism offences or other specified offences? This is the same test with an important addition as for dangerousness. I also have in mind the provisions of Section 274 of the Sentencing Act 2020 on a required sentence of custody for life for an offence carrying a life sentence. I have helpful sentencing notes from both the prosecution and the defence. I also have a second note from the prosecution specifically on the issue of dangerousness and a response submitted on your behalf. I have a detailed pre-sentence report dated the 28th of March from an experienced probation officer. I am grateful to the author for their detailed analysis and assessment of the issues in this case. Since the last hearing of this case, I've also been provided with further documents. I have statements from Detective Constable Alwareth setting out relevant information about you and what appears to be your current attitude or mindset whilst you've been in custody. The officer has reviewed prison intelligence where you've made violent threats to kill, behead and chop up staff, have their loved ones follow home and behead an imam and another prisoner. Some of those reports date back to last autumn. Some are more recent and post-date the preparation of the pre-sentence report. Initially, on your behalf, it was submitted that the statement of the officer should be disregarded on the basis that it was unsubstantiated, equivocal and unproven bad character evidence. I made clear I did not agree with that assessment. It is material that is very significant in terms of the risk that have to be assessed. Whilst I accepted the weight to be attached to the contents has to be considered, it cannot be ignored. Following the last hearing on the 12th of May, DC Alwareth sent a further request to HMP at Wandsworth in relation to any intelligence relevant to you, so it could be disclosed and considered. This further request also sought confirmation as to any adjudication and or disciplinary action taken against you. I note only one instance of formal adjudication with a verdict not to proceed. And in terms of disciplinary action, I note a number of negative disciplinary actions have been entered by prison staff, spanning the period from June 2022 through to the 8th of May this year. The further statements set out other material relevant to the issue of dangerousness and to future risk. Attached to the statement is a schedule with all the intelligence material set out, and that schedule runs to some 69 pages. I repeat the observation I set out above, that this material needs to be viewed and considered in terms of future risks. Included within the pre-sentence report are observations about the interaction with Prevent from November 2020 onwards and the lack of engagement. I also note the observations in the report about you saying you've changed your attitudes and beliefs and how this is at odds with the material from the prison. An extract of that material set out on page 7 of that report. The author of the pre-sentence report also sets out a list of risk factors in relation to the assessment on dangerousness. The assessment in the report of the level of danger is very high, and allowing for all various features of the case, the author concludes the section of the report on assessment of the risk of serious harm with this observation. Having considered all the information above, the court may well determine that the criteria for dangerousness has been met. The prosecution submit that you are someone who intended to inflict serious violence on or endanger the lives of other people both in the UK and abroad. That intention was not merely transitory, but one you had settled on during a period of around 6 months as you set about preparing to commit those acts. They also submit that your time in custody following arrest and charge has not led to any reduction in the risk you pose to others. If anything, they submit that this court should be concerned that you are someone who does one thing when in the company of other prisoners, seeks out those who share your extremist views, but then say you have been doing the opposite when in conversation with professionals. Their submission is that this duplicity only serves to heighten the risk you pose to others. On your behalf, it is submitted that you are on the path to de-radicalisation. It is accepted that your progress may be imperfect and as yet incomplete, but you've taken significant steps forward. It is now accepted that the dangerousness test is met, but it is submitted that any risk you pose can be managed by the imposition of a sentence under Section 265 of the Sentencing Act, or a sentence for an offender of particular concern. If that is not accepted by this court, it is submitted that an extended sentence with a limited period of extension would suffice, as you will be subject to onerous conditions on any licence. As I've set out, the sentencing hearing was adjourned part heard, so as to allow more time for those who represent you to consider the prison intelligence material, and so that they could address the possibility of a discretionary life sentence to meet the concerns of the risks going forward. I have a letter from your mother dated the 13th of April this year. She sets out her support for you and her assessment of your progress. She also makes clear that your father and your sisters will support you whilst in custody and on your release. She sets out her assessment that your views have changed in your period in custody through your engagement with an ideological mentor and since taking time to think and reflect. She also sets out the regret you have expressed to her for your actions. The supplementary note for sentence submitted on your behalf sets out extracts from a number of the decisions of the Court of Appeal on the approach to discretionary life sentences, as well as addressing issues around age and maturity. Future risk is the key issue in this case, and the real concern as to when, if at all, any risk may really reduce or cease. I have very much in mind your age and maturity, that young people mature at different stages, but that has to be put into the mix alongside the observations of others and the views you appear to be expressing to some. Assessing risks is a very different task in terrorism cases to other types of cases involving violence. In my judgment, the threshold as set out in Section 268B and for dangerousness is clearly passed. In my judgment, you are someone where there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by you of further terrorism offences or other specified offences. Section 268B refers to the imposition of a sentence of custody for life, and Section 268BF, the risk of multiple deaths condition. Further provisions relevant to that condition are set out in subsection 3. Both the prosecution and the defence agree that under the current guideline, based on the levels of preparation here, your culpability would come within Category C. With harm, it is also agreed that the case falls within Category 3. I agree with the assessments of both the prosecution and your counsel as to the stage that your preparations have got to, and that it is safer to place harm into Category 3 than the higher Category 2. I note that it would have been much easier for you to attack a police officer in the street than it would be for you to join ISIS in Syria, and so of the two terror acts you intended to carry out, the former more likely, and the latter on the evidence as set out. For such a case, the start point for sentence would be one of 8 years custody, with a range of sentence of between 6 and 10 years custody. The prosecution has identified a number of aggravating factors. They submit that here the offending was motivated by hostility towards non-believers, you were in possession of extremist material, you were in contact with others who were also extremists, particularly Miss A, You used a number of aliases to conceal your true identity. You intended to commit acts of terrorism against soldiers and or police officers, and you failed to respond to warnings about your conduct, in particularly from your family and others in the mosques. Whilst some of those factors are accepted by Mr. Zahir, he makes observations as to the applicability of others. As a general point, I agree with Mr. Zahir that I need to make sure that to the extent these matters go into the initial categorisation, I do not double count. In terms of mitigating factors, you are of previous good character, now aged 19, 20 on the 3rd of October this year. At the time of the offending, you were 18. Looking at the impact of the aggravating and mitigating features I've identified, the start point would, in my judgment, be one of 9 years custody. It is important to stress that the guidelines also require the court to consider appropriate minimum terms, serious terrorism offences and exceptional circumstances, should they apply, as well as the impact of a finding of dangerousness as part of the sentencing procedure. Having reflected on all the facts of the offence, I do not find that the multiple deaths condition is met in this case, and so the passing of a serious terrorism sentence is not required. All are agreed that in those circumstances where the dangerousness test has been found to be met, the options open to this court are a discretionary life sentence, an extended sentence, or indeed a special sentence for an offender of particular concern. As I repeat, in relation to the option of a discretionary life sentence, I adjourned sentence on the 12th of May so as to allow your counsel and solicitor to consider any other material there might be that might shed more light on your conduct and your mindset whilst in custody. They have had the opportunity to do so, and today have made further extensive submissions on your behalf in relation to that issue. With regard to the type of sentences that have to be considered, I note what is set out at paragraph 22 of the judgment of the then Lord Chief Justice in the case of the Crown against Barinskas in relation to discretionary life sentences. I need to consider the seriousness of the offence and any previous convictions. Well, here there are none. Perhaps most significantly in this case, I need to consider the level of danger to the public posed by you and whether there is a reliable estimate of the length of time you will remain a danger and the available alternative sentences. It is also important to note that since the decision in Barinskas, Parliament has passed further legislation with regard to terrorist offenders that I've set out. It is also important to note the particular and unique questions that can arise with the assessment of future risks of those involved in terrorism. In mitigation, Mr. Zahir submits in relation to the offending itself that regard has to be had to the levels of preparation in this case, that they were not far advanced and the risk of death was very remote. On the second limb and the potential commission of an act of terrorism here, he submits the steps or acts taken were limited in scope, of limited utility, and the prospect of an act of terrorism, again, remote. In relation to the mindset material and the online relationship, again, it is submitted that it shows a lack of maturity, along with a degree of bravado in a young man. He properly relies on the fact of your chronological age and the level of maturity, and that you are someone who has a supportive family. In relation to the prison records, he submits that there are positive reports of changes. He submits that when you were detained, you were an extremist. He invites caution as to the frustration on your part as not being seen to be any part of extremism. He submits that some of the reports show your candour and your willingness to openly discuss matters with prison staffs. He observes that you are now an enhanced prisoner. 3 periods are set out by Mr. Zahir, but he submits show the prison records and the materials in a different light. In the course of this hearing, Mr. Zahir took the court through those 3 periods. As I observed in the course of his submissions, it is helpful to have the full intelligence material in a case such as this, where future risk is the key issue. Mr. Zahir submits on your behalf that the prison material supports the passing of an extended sentence rather than life sentence. He concedes, and properly so, that you are not someone who's free from extremism, nor that you are somebody who's not dangerous. But he submits the threshold for a discretionary life sentence is not passed. In my judgment, the prison material presents a very mixed picture. There is some material that supports the stance adopted by Mr. Zakir, and which is to your credit as to your openness and candour. However, there is other material that is pointing in the opposite direction and is of considerable concern. Would you stand, please? Having reflected on all the matters that have been set out and summarised in these remarks, and in particular on the level of danger to the public you pose, and whether there was any reliable estimate of the length of time you will remain a danger, I am of the view that there must in this case be a discretionary life sentence, and that is the sentence I impose upon you. There will be a sentence of custody for life. The risks around you, albeit as a young man, are clear and concerning. The way in which you say some things to professionals and yet say the contrary to others means that there is, in my judgment, no clear picture of when those risks may abate. That position supports my decision as to dangerousness leading to custody for life. You have pleaded guilty. Your plea warrants a reduction in the sentence would otherwise have been passed. Having reflected on the submissions made this morning, the appropriate reduction in your case is 1/3. Having considered what would otherwise be the appropriate categorisation of this case and the impact of the aggravating and mitigating features, including age and maturity, the appropriate sentence and minimum term, as I indicate, would be one of 9 years custody, allowing for your plea a minimum term of 6 years. As there is now no early release for terrorist offenders, that minimum term is the same as what was used to be called the determinate term. The days on remand, which I'm told number 367 days, will count towards that sentence, and so the sentence of this court is one of custody for life with a minimum of 6 years, less 367 days. What that means is this, that before you will be first considered for parole, there will be a period of 6 years, less 367 days. If the information which I've been provided as to the days on remand proves to be inaccurate, then the prosecution or defence must notify the court so that the case can be relisted to correct that calculation as soon as possible, and in any event within 56 days. When it comes to the minimum term that you will serve, I make plain that I am not ordering that you are to be released at the end of it. Whether you will be released or not at that stage, or at any later stage, will be a matter for the parole board to consider. Only when the minimum term has been served can the parole board decide whether it is safe to release you or not. If the board does release you, you remain on licence and liable to recall for the rest of your life. If the statutory surcharge applies to your case, then the appropriate orders can be drawn up. I order the forfeiture under Section 23 of the Terrorism Act 2000 of 4 items: RJB1, a mobile phone; RJB2, a laptop; RJB23, tactical combat gloves; and RJB20, tactical combat goggles. You will be subject to notification requirements as set out in the Counter-Terrorism Act 2008. You may go down.
So that is the sentencing of 19-year-old Matthew King, and that was the judge, Mark Lucroft, KC, indicating that this was serious enough for discretionary life sentence, although the minimum is 6 years because of the various sentencing conditions, less 365 days. But the judge saying that there was a clear concern and a level of danger to the public before beginning his sentencing. Judge Lucroft saying that King had expressed an active desire, as he said, to travel to Syria, controlled by Islamic State, to participate in IS activities that would have seen him commit serious violence. The judge going on to say it was clear he developed an entrenched Islamist mindset with extreme anti-Western views and intended to commit terror attacks both in the UK and overseas. In detail, the suggestion was that he was carrying out reconnaissance at police stations, at railway stations and army barracks in 2021 and 2022, with terror attacks being planned on British police and soldiers, said the judge. So he has now been taken down there at the Old Bailey. Let's bring in Mark White, who is outside the court there, our security editor. And Mark, clearly there was a lot of surveillance going on in terms of this man and piecing together what was clearly a very serious threat.
Yes, I mean, you heard in the judge weighing up the mitigating factors and the aggravating factors that clearly in the judge's mind he considered this young man to be a considerable threat to members of the public. And a lot of detail gone into in terms of what the sentencing guidelines are for the judge to weigh up when passing sentence. There will be people who are looking at a sentence for someone who has pleaded guilty to effectively plotting to murder police officers and soldiers and say that a minimum term of 6 years, less of course the 360 odd days that he's already served on remand, seems like a very limited sentence and quite a weak sentence. Well, of course, one of the reasons the judges have allowed cameras in court is so that the public themselves can listen to those reasons that he set out, and he was at pains to point out that although the minimum term is 6 years, that doesn't mean that he will automatically be released at that point. It is up to the parole board when they speak to and examine all of the evidence surrounding this individual as to whether he should be released. And of course, this now being a discretionary life sentence means that for the rest of his life, he will be on licence and subject to recall to prison should he offend in any way. But this case itself, Mark, a very significant case in terms of it was a real example of what the police and security services have been warning about for some time now, and that was the potential for those who were in lockdown in their bedrooms with access to the internet being self-radicalised. And that's exactly what happened to this individual. He was on the internet, going onto the extremist websites, converting to Islam. We heard, of course, that he then did, after lockdown, try attending a mosque, but because of his extremist views, he was kicked out of a local mosque down in Essex itself. So a real indication of what the police and security services had warned was an inevitability over lockdown, the fact that there will be those vulnerable people who have access to the internet, who will be taking in these extremist propaganda sites and potentially acting on it. This man had gone as far as to carry out reconnaissance of an army base of barracks in Essex, also reconnaissance of a magistrates' court in Essex, had gone to a local railway station and filmed police officers on the platform there. There was definite intent of this individual, according to the prosecutors, and indeed accepted by him when he pleaded guilty, that he was going to attack either police officers or members of the military.
And also the judge referring to this link to IS and Syria. Judge Longhurst saying that he'd called another girl called Miss A in court, planning to die a martyr in Syria, and there were conversations about that, indicating, of course, in his summing up, why he thought he still posed a risk to the public despite his maturity or immaturity.
Yeah, I think one of the other important issues to come out from this case, Mark, is the realisation that although Islamic State, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, this terrorist group has been significantly degraded in Syria and Iraq over recent years because of activities by coalition militaries, including the United Kingdom and the United States. It still remains a potent threat. Yes, on the battlefield to an extent, they moved off into other countries. They're still in Syria and Iraq to a degree, but they've gone off to the Philippines, to Africa and other locations. And what they haven't lost any capacity to do, and what they continue to do, is to pump out their propaganda over the internet on a daily basis, looking for vulnerable people who are willing to act on their jihadist, extremist preachings and views. And as I say, those with the threat picture has moved from sophisticated plots a few years back to individuals who are radicalised in their bedrooms or radicalised by meeting another extremist and then going off and attempting to perpetrate, or in some cases actually successfully perpetrating, low-level, low-sophistication terrorist attacks, which are still horrific and deadly in nature, such as we've seen in 2017 with vehicle attacks on Westminster Bridge and then the murder of PC Keith Palmer at Westminster as well, the vehicle attack on London Bridge in 2017 and the subsequent knife attacks that took place in Borough Market. They may be less sophisticated, but they can be just as deadly.
And certainly Judge Lucraft saying that he was someone who put the public at risk. But interesting that his mother reported him to the police and when they put him under surveillance after going to the anti-extreme agency Prevent. So that part of the process did actually work, it seems.
Yeah, and his mother was commended really for her actions in doing that, because sadly there are many relatives of individuals that fall into a path down into extremism who do not alert the authorities out of a loyalty to their loved one, a feeling that their loved one is going to get into significant trouble. But this mother was brave enough to contact to Prevent counter-extremism programme. Things were set in motion, and of course we now have her son going off to jail, but a son who has not committed murder, who himself is not dead, potentially at the arms of armed police responding to that terrorist attack. And in the fullness of time, I'm sure she will be hoping that this is a young man who will be de-radicalised and no longer a significant threat to members of the public.
But for the moment, Mark, thank you for that. Just to reiterate, Mark reporting on the case of Matthew King, their 19-year-old sentenced to a discretionary life sentence, although the minimum of 6 years minus some 367 days. He'd pleaded guilty to the planning of terror attacks on British police and soldiers. The judge indicating that because of the guilty plea and the issue of his maturity, that's why the minimum was 6 years rather than a longer sentence. More reaction to that, of course, as it comes through. Now, elsewhere, Boris Johnson appears to have stymied the government's efforts to challenge the COVID-19 inquiry and its launching of a judicial review into that process. The former Prime Minister telling the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, in this letter that he will hand over all his unredacted material directly to her. The Cabinet Office, of course, had been arguing that much of that material should remain confidential because it was, quote, unambiguously irrelevant. Well, they launched a legal challenge, the review, or the judicial review, which will get underway on Tuesday, we're told. Let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley, joining us. And, Olivia, we're just reflecting, it's not just what Boris Johnson has done, it's what he said when he was making this decision. I'm not willing to let my material become a test case. So he's really sort of put a spoke in the wheels of this judicial process.
Well, absolutely. And it's still not clear whether the judicial process is going to go ahead. Because
really?
Yeah. It seems a bit pointless going ahead with the judicial process once all of the unredacted WhatsApps are in the hands of the COVID inquiry. But it looks like it might, because the government seems pretty determined to argue on the principle that unredacted messages between ministers and senior civil servants shouldn't have to be submitted if they are unambiguously irrelevant, in the government's words, to the COVID inquiry. Because let's not forget, these aren't the only messages that the COVID inquiry will be asking for over the years.
Because it's going to be, what, three years?
Drag
possibly.
on,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is an awful lot of information they will want to see. So the government is saying that it is a point of principle that they want to launch this judicial review. It doesn't, from what they're saying, it doesn't sound as though there's something particular that they don't want to be seen. It's simply that they want to make the case that handing over masses and masses of private information isn't necessary.
So they are worried about the precedent that would set. However, one reflects they are the ones that wanted this inquiry, set the remit, and also appointed Baroness Hallett. And she's been saying, it is for me to decide what is relevant or not. That's the whole point of my job.
Well, absolutely. And most judges and even Junior Minister George Freeman think that the government's case would be pretty weak and the government would probably lose in court. It's not clear whether George Freeman was freewheeling when he was speaking on Question Time yesterday. He is a bit of a freewheeler, but he is a government minister, and he said that he thought it was likely that the government would lose the case, but he thought that the principle was worth fighting for anyway.
Right.
So it's not quite clear. Rishi Sunak has said repeatedly that he is confident in the government's case. It's not quite clear why that is, because it does sound like the government's case is pretty weak, given, as you say, that they ordered the COVID inquiry and gave Baroness Hallett this very large remit, which essentially allows her to ask for any information that she wants.
And, of course, that hearing has yet to decide what the government's case actually is. But, Olivia, for the moment, thank you for that. But let's now speak to former civil servant, author, first female private secretary in 10 Downing Street, Caroline Slocott, who's been following the twists and turns with us. Yet another dramatic, well, is it a U-turn? I'm not quite sure. We're just asking Olivia there, is this the case, really, that it undermines the whole case for judicial review if Boris Johnson says, there you are, have it all?
No, I don't think it will, though obviously it is another sort of nail in the case, really, if he's prepared to handle this across. But they are actually asking for similar information from others. There's, I think it's Henry Wood, who was one of his, he was lead COVID special advisor. And I believe there are other ministers as well, perhaps not of his prominence, that they've been asking for messages from. So I think the case will continue, but I think the case is not likely to succeed, would be my view. I think Boris Johnson is possibly playing political games here, because just remember that it was only a couple of days ago where he said he had released all of his messages to the Cabinet Office, who should then pass them on to the inquiry. But it emerged last night that, in fact, he'd only sent them messages from May 2021 onwards. So, no messages from the period when all the lockdowns were happening, which is the one of most intense interest. There are some sort of issues around his previous phone. His number had been made public. Or it had always been public, and when they realised that that was a security breach, he had to stop using it. But
I'm just going to interrupt, Caroline. That we should point out that, as far as we know, in this letter, Boris Johnson is actually telling Baroness Hallett, know that phone is going to be made available, and you can try and retrieve the messages, because that is that vital first year of the pandemic.
Exactly. So he's saying now that, having said that he'd handed all the messages across, he's now saying he really is handing all the messages across. But of course, he's got control of what he hands across. And it hasn't yet happened, because there is this issue of whether, I know it sounds slightly comical, but whether he can actually turn that earlier phone on or not. But on the face of it, he's undermined the Prime Minister's case. And I think it's quite sort of... it's quite sort of delicious in a way. I suspect he's very proud of himself, because he's thinking, here I am coming across as honest Boris, whereas Rishi Sunak is looking shifty. And
it would also indicate, however, that he is confident about the material that's going to be passed across, that it is not going to show failure in any way.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think Boris Johnson is a man who takes each day as it comes, and I think he's got a victory today, but also he hasn't got a lot to lose. I mean, he's had quite a series of revelations about his conduct over Partygate. He's had Anthony Selden's book. I don't know if you read that, but it does show that it was a sort of chaotic government, and that he left a lot to others in a way that was not good. So I think, he's not necessarily going to come out well eventually. But what he does know is that this is going to take years for this inquiry to actually release all of these papers. And, of course, they'll only release the ones which are relevant. And that would be a decision taken by the inquiry, not by the government. So, it's today's battles, I think, he's fighting, and I think he's trying to look better than Rishi Sunak. And remember that Rishi Sunak, when he stood on the steps of Number 10, said that his government would be one of integrity, professionalism, and accountability. Brackets not like Boris Johnson's. And yet here is a real test of accountability, and he appears to be failing it. And actually, I just don't see how he can win. He might win the case. on the day. But then people will think that something's been hidden, and if he loses it, then he'll have looked shifty as well. So I think actually Boris Johnson's playing the politics better at this point than Sunak.
Okay. Yeah, but obviously the families want answers as well, and that process to begin on Tuesday. I suspect we might be speaking to you again then. Caroline, thank you very much indeed for your time here in GB News. Now, the former This Morning presenter Philip Schofield breaking his silence with not one but two interviews, claiming that he has, quote, lost everything. He's been speaking to both the BBC and the Sun newspaper and said he feels like a victim of hate, believing his television career is over. Indeed, he's been dropped by yet another brand in a diminishing list of commercial deals that have gone west. Let's get more with our news reporter Ray Addison joining us. Of course, Ray's been following the story, camped outside Television Centre, and we suspect there might be a bit more to come next week on this, particularly on Monday, of course, because a certain Holly Willoughby might be back on the set or not. Who knows?
Well, they're saying that she will be. They're saying that she's determined to do so. However, friends close to Holly are saying that they're advising her against it and saying perhaps it would be best to put a bit of distance between herself and this sort of ongoing saga, perhaps permanently or perhaps until any kind of investigation has been cleared.
Which shows just how toxic, if we can use that phrase, it's become. And, we've been perhaps, or many people have been treating it as a bit of a showbiz story, a bit of a soap opera. But we've got this interesting assessment now from Dame Caroline Dinenage, who's the chair of the Culture and Media Committee, who'll be calling all the ITV chiefs in front of them. And she said, no, look, there are significant matters of concern here, issues around whistleblowing and the matter of protection for public service broadcasters.
Every workplace has a duty of care towards its staff, and ITV's no different. This morning is no different. And Dame Caroline stressing that safeguarding here is key. She wants to know what kind of duty of care has been provided towards people working on This Morning. What was the workplace culture like in terms of the relationship between the senior members of the team and more junior members? And was there a potential abuse of power allowed to happen here? Obviously, we know that Schofield says he regrets this. It shouldn't have taken place. So presumably he agrees that this is a scenario that should not have been allowed to happen.
Yeah, I mean, she went on to say this is not a witch hunt, but, I want to know what support was offered, financial or emotional or otherwise. So clearly she wants to drill down on what has been going on. But we reflect that maybe in terms of Schofield himself, by what he said and the way he said it, is there actually a case now for addressing those sort of questions to his future?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, when we look at the sort of the impact this situation has had, I mean, Alison Hammond was hosting This Morning earlier on today. She was in tears after they played a clip of that BBC interview. She said that she's finding this whole experience extremely painful. She said she loves him, but she knows that what he has done is wrong. Now, when it comes to what Philip's own perspective of his own future, he believes his TV career is gone. It's over. He doesn't see a future for himself in that sense. Also, we're hearing about these endorsements and deals that are going south in terms of a wine company and some sort of kitchen periphery company as well that's disappeared. So in that regard, where will he go next? He's struggling to see what will happen with that.
OK, Ray, thank you for taking through the latest details. More inevitably to come on that. We'll keep you updated on the developments. Now, after the break, we're off to the races. We'll be live from the Derby on Epsom Downs and looking at, events on and off the track. See you shortly.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the Derby meeting is back in Epsom for another year, the two-day racing festival kicking off, but concerns about protesters who might make an appearance after the chaos, of course, we remember at the Grand National back in April. Animal Rising has claimed it will assemble up to 1,000 protesters to disrupt the festival on Saturday, tomorrow, after the Jockey Club were granted a High Court injunction to prevent protesters from disrupting the meeting. Well, let's get the latest now with Paul Hawkins, who's down at Epsom Downs, near to the racecourse there. Paul, is there evidence of increased security, or what have they done to try and ensure this goes off without incident?
First of all, Mark, they've closed off the legal route, or at least done as much as they can legally with that High Court injunction. In terms of the security operation, the Jockey Club, which owns the racecourse, have invested £150,000 in enhanced security. They've got more marshals, more stewards. They've got plans in place to try and prevent anything from happening, but they admit this is a very different course from Aintree, where the Grand National is held, where there is a lot of fencing around that course, around the perimeter. Here, you're in the middle of Epsom Downs. There's a lot of public right-of-way pathways both through the course and around the course. It's very difficult to prevent. So but they do have plans that will spring into action should anything happen, if there are any protests. Indeed, there is going to be a peaceful protest out the front by Animal Rising. They've liaised with the Jockey Club themselves. The Jockey Club have said, look, we don't want you protesting inside the ground, but outside you can do whatever you want. So they're holding a kind of alternative Epsom with things like three-legged races, go-kart races, art and crafts, vegan food on sale. You get the message. So the reason they don't want this to go ahead is the reason why they want all thoroughbred racing stops is because they believe racing is a cruel sport. They point to the use of whips, they point to the number of horse deaths. They claim there are around 20 in May in British horse racing. There were 3 at the Grand National. They point to they claim that horses, when they come to the end of their racing career, that they're basically sent to the knackers yard, and that this is no life for a horse. So they want to see the sport stopped. This is what Louisa Hillwood had to say from Animal Rising when she was speaking to Breakfast earlier.
There will be a large group of people protesting out the front, yes, and everyone is welcome to join. Please come down. But just like, in Aintree, I'm sure there will be some people who are willing to step in, use their body to prevent harm from coming to these horses. That's really what we want. We love animals. We want to protect them. as well as to start this conversation about how we use animals and how we exploit them and how that doesn't align with loving them. What happened at Aintree, for example, at the Grand National, is that people tried to enter the race course about 20 minutes before it started. There was no race happening. There was no risk to the horses or to any people.
So on the issue of the whips, the British Horse Racing Authority, they're the independent body that regulate horse racing within the UK. They say that the whip, really, it's more like an air-cushioned pad, right? There are restrictions on the number of times the riders can use it, and if you breach that minimum number of times, then you can be penalised, you can be suspended for it. The pad itself, it was designed in consultation with the RSPCA, and that last year, in the whole of 2022, out of 92,000 runners, there was only one that had a whip mark. On the issue of horse deaths, the number of horses suffering fatal injuries has decreased to just 0.21% of runners. When it comes to the issue of what the horse happens to the horse after it's finished its racing career, there is a programme in place so that a lot of these horses move on to have other careers, other lives, and things like dressage. Some of them are used for therapy sessions, equine therapy it's called, when it comes to dealing with human beings' mental health. So there is a life for horses after this. There's a kind of whole holistic life care, and that they very much push back on this notion that people who are into horse racing don't care about the animals themselves. And in terms of the security operation, as I say, lots of money invested in trying to secure this course, but a lot of plans in place for when or if something happens tomorrow. They're prepared for any eventuality.
OK, but at least the sun is shining, even though it's looking a bit breezy down there. Paul, for the moment on the Epsom Downs, thanks for updating us. Back to you a bit later. But let's speak now to Jack Andrews, a jockey who can join us. Jack, thank you for your time. Just to ask you, first of all, about how tough is Epsom? Because, of course, a lot of people will be seeing this as time to wave bye to Frankie Dettori.
Yeah, Epsom is a very tough track, very undulating, and the camber can run away from horses on the closing stages, and it makes it hard for them to keep balance and riders to keep them balanced.
And just what we were discussing there with Paul in terms of the protest that may happen, of course, one of the things that they're protesting at is the use of the whip. Where are you on that?
I think the BHA has gone to a huge extent to make the whip a safer thing, and I think the fact that it doesn't really get called a whip anymore, it gets called a pro cush, because that is what it is at the end of the day. It's a cushioned pad, but it's not there to hurt the horse, it's just to encourage them to go faster. And I'm a very big believer in the whip should stay, and I think the BHA have gone to extreme extents to keep it that way.
And have you used it or deployed it yourself?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I'm not someone that uses it a huge amount compared to other people, but like I said, it's very much needed on a horse when you're riding them. It's a half-ton animal, and when you're only weighing 10 stone, 11 stone or whatever, you can't. It's the old saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So.
And talking of that, I mean, what does it take to actually succeed at Epsom? It used to be sort of Lester Piggott's great course as well, and as we say, Frankie Dettori with his swan song there. I mean, is there a certain type of jockey that can do well there?
No, I'm not sure it's the jockey. It's more of a horse, really. You know, it's quite a specialist track where, like I said before, it's very undulating, and a lot of horses can get unbalanced, and I think it comes down to the most balanced horses, and long and short of it, the best one on the day normally wins. So.
Right. OK. So no secret about that. And we've seen everyone turning up their finery despite the rail strikes and the problems getting there. I mean, the other issue, of course, I guess it's a wonderful get together for everyone as well.
Yeah, of course, it's a huge occasion. I'm lucky enough to have been a couple of times before to the Derby, and no, it's a fantastic spectacle where a lot of locals come together, and like I said, to enjoy one of the finest horse races in the world. So.
OK, well, we shall watch with interest what happens. But Jack, thank you. I know you're not competing there this time round, but good luck. We'll speak to you again, of course, when you're back in the saddle. But let's just take you to Romania, I think, because there is King Charles. We're just getting these pictures of this visit and indications that we have I think, a band. No band playing, but obviously they are at attention there for this visit. King Charles does actually have a house in Romania, in Transylvania, no less. And he is a very keen watercolourist, of course, and many of his paintings come from his visits to Romania. And he has indicated that he enjoys the solitude and the peace of that particular country. But we'll update you on that as we get a little bit more. The picture's just coming in. But it's time to get an update on all your news headlines now, because Rhiannon's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:34. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A 19-year-old man has been handed a discretionary life sentence with a minimum term of 6 years in the first terrorism sentencing in England and Wales to be televised. Matthew King, a Muslim convert from Essex, pleaded guilty to plotting an attack on police and railway stations and a British Army barracks between 2021 and 2022. Boris Johnson has confirmed he is sending his unredacted WhatsApp messages directly to the COVID-19 inquiry. In his letter to its chairwoman, Baroness Hallett, he wrote, "I'd like to do the same with any material that may be on an old phone, which I've previously been told I can no longer access safely." It comes after the government argued it shouldn't have to hand over what it calls irrelevant material. Ministers are preparing for a legal battle with the inquiry. A preliminary hearing will be held on Tuesday. Philip Schofield says he's lost everything after revelations of his affair with a younger male colleague, but insists he didn't groom him. In his first interview since leaving ITV, Schofield told the BBC he's broken and ashamed and he'll forever be sorry. The former This Morning presenter hit out at criticism, calling it relentless, and claimed the affair has been blown up because of homophobia.
You find each other attractive in different age groups. I mean, it does happen, but it's the mere fact that this is so gigantic. And I appreciate the workplace and and the history. I get that, but it's the fact that it's so massive is predominantly homophobia.
You're up to date. To get more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2523 and €1.1635. The price of gold is £1,580.55 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,562 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Oh, welcome back to GB News Live. A 19-year-old man has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 6 years in prison after pleading guilty to planning terror attacks in London. 19-year-old Matthew King, a Muslim convert from Essex, pleaded guilty to plotting attacks at police stations, railway stations and an army barracks between 2021 and 2022. He was arrested at his home in May and was sentenced at the Old Bailey in the past hour. Let's get more with our Home Security editor, Mark White. And Mark, indications that he was pretty much radicalised, even trying to get to Syria to join IS or at least become involved in their operations.
Yes, that's right. He was radicalised and converted to Islam after viewing material online. He called himself Abdul Kalashnikov. I mean, he seems almost comical, but the authorities, the prosecutors say actually this man had deadly intent, that he'd gone as far as buying those tactical combat gloves and glasses, his camouflage jacket. He had gone on reconnaissance missions to an army barracks in Essex and also to police outside a magistrate's court in his local area, as well as one of his local railway stations where he filmed police officers on patrol on the platform there. He had discussed with an online girlfriend who was only referred to as Miss A in court, but they discussed kidnapping and assaulting and decapitating a soldier, as well as committing other atrocities. He pleaded guilty before the start of his trial, which meant that he got a third of his sentence. The judge, though, Mark Lucraft, said he still considered the risk that this man posed to be so serious that he wanted to pass a discretionary life sentence. Now, the minimum term that he will serve is some 6 years minus 360 odd days that he's been in prison on remand. Now, many people might view that as quite weak, but the judge is at pains to go through all of the sentencing guidelines that he has to abide by, and also to point out that although the minimum term is 6 years, it is up to the probation service, a parole board, I should say, when they are trying to assess the continuing risk that this individual poses as to when they deem that he might be fit for release from prison. And of course, being a discretionary life sentence, Mark, he will be on a life sentence for the rest of his life, meaning that if he offends at any point in the future, he can be recalled to prison at any point.
And an indication in the court hearing that it was his mother that actually alerted the authorities. He went to one of these anti-extremism agency, Prevent, and then police started to carry out the surveillance after that.
Yeah, well, an indication of just how extreme this young man had become. He had gone to a local mosque in his local area, but that mosque did not at all like his behaviour and his extremist views, and they told him that he was no longer welcome at this mosque. Clearly, a lot of what his extremist mindset was becoming, he was parroting to his mother, and she took the brave decision, according to the court, of contacting the counter-extremism programme Prevent. Now, she was praised for that in court because it is notable that actually the vast majority of close family members do not go to the authorities via Prevent or other avenues to alert them when they have suspicions about a loved one becoming increasingly extreme. So this was unusual for a mother to do that, but an indication of how concerned she was. And as I say, this is also a case that's notable, Mark, because it was an example of what the police and security services have been warning about recently, which is individuals during lockdown, during the COVID pandemic, really in their home, on the internet, being exposed to these extremism messages, and then vulnerable and impressionable individuals going off and acting on that. This was a case, and there are other individuals out there, the police and security services warn, who have also been radicalised during the lockdown months and could potentially pose a threat in the future.
Mark, thank you for updating us on that sentencing there at the Old Bailey as he starts that life sentence, a minimum of 6 years, of course. Now, with summer having arrived, yes, would you believe it, many gardeners anxiously waiting to see their favourite flowers come into bloom, including the haunting sight of the Florida ghost orchid, one of the world's rarest plants, flown across the Atlantic, carefully held in a passenger's lap, no less, displayed at the Chelsea Flower Show, but conditions just too cool for it to bloom there. But now, in the toasty surroundings of Kew Gardens, it's appeared in all its glory. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba went to find out and see more.
Well, I'm here at Kew Gardens, where for the first time a rare ghost orchid has flowered here in the UK, and already lots of people have been here to see it. Some are saying, well, it's smaller than I expected, and others are saying, actually, this is beautiful. This is something that I have never seen when coming to see species like this. So, of course, not many of them in the world, around 2,000 of them. Of course, it is endangered. It's native to southwest Florida and Cuba. And this morning we had the pleasure of speaking to one of the experts here about the story and how it came here, and this is what he had to say.
So it flew from Chicago to the UK around 3 weeks ago, and it was carried on the lap of a conservationist from the United States to keep it safe and warm. And it has been displayed at Chelsea throughout the opening of the festival, still in bud, and it arrived here in Kew on Sunday, and it opened for us just yesterday. It's a very unusual orchid. It's a leafless orchid, meaning that it has just roots. So out of nowhere, you see this bloom coming out of just a mass of root. It's quite unusual, and it's a very, very rare orchid. Actually, it's my very first time in my lifetime that I see the Dendrophylax lindeni in bloom, or at all, really. It's one of those plants that you always read about and you hear about it and you see picture of it, but to see it in real person is quite something. It's probably could be one of a lifetime thing. We don't know when this plant is going to bloom again. If hopefully it will grow well enough to be a regular occasion in the future, but it's something definitely to come to Q4.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of interest, and there has been for most part of the morning, and likely for the next couple of days. It was at the Chelsea Flower Show, but didn't bloom there. But luckily, people have had the opportunity to come and see it here. Now, over the next few days, people will have the opportunity. It depends how happy it is and how the atmosphere in here will keep it alive. Just to give you a glimpse of how warm it is, I'd probably say 20s or maybe even 30 degrees, but it's very warm, so it's allowing this flower to be in that tropical or even weather similar to where it's native to in southwest Florida and Cuba. But for now, people are fortunate to get the glimpse of it whilst it's still here at Kew Gardens.
The very happy Florida ghost orchid in Kew, and you can see that in the terrarium if you're planning to go and see that wonderful bloom. Now, some good news in the battle against cancer. Researchers saying a blood test for more than 50 types of the disease showing real promise. It's a trial led by researchers from the University of Oxford, able to successfully identify 2/3 of cancer cases among 5,000 patients with suspected symptoms. So it's hoped that after further research and trials, it could be able to speed up diagnosis and then fast-track treatment for patients. Let's speak now to oncologist and cancer researcher at the University of Warwick, Professor Lawrence Young. Lawrence, thank you very much indeed for your time. And I gather it's using DNA, this sort of telltale that shows all the problems, and certainly indications it can apply for all types of the disease.
Yeah, so it's a bit like finding a needle in a haystack. With this very sensitive technology, you can identify little footprints of cancer DNA in the blood and use that to tell you what type of cancer it is, that's where it is, and more importantly, to diagnose cancer early. Of course, we all know that early diagnosis is so important and is essentially the only way to really cure cancer.
And in terms of it being applied within the NHS, how near are we as this becoming part of our regular preventative sort of structure within the NHS?
Yeah, so what we've seen is really a very first step in this study. These are patients with symptoms. There's another big study going on in the NHS in patients without symptoms. And that's the interesting thing here. Can you just go along every few years and have a test, this blood test, and if it's positive, then go on and have further tests? This is developing at a pace now. The technology needs to improve a little bit to make it more sensitive, but you can see this happening within the next 5 years or so. And so that it will be a situation that when you get to a certain age, perhaps when you're 50, every few years you'll have this blood test, and if there's a sign that suggests cancer, you'll then go on and have further tests. So this is really a game changer.
Right, so like a cancer MOT then, if you like.
Yeah, and we know that, scanning is very good. And
yeah.
The trouble is we don't have the capacity within the NHS for us all to go and have MRIs every few years. This is going to really add a lot to the ability to diagnose cancer early, and particularly for those really difficult cancers where treatment options are limited and where the success of treatment unfortunately hasn't been that great over the last few years, like lung cancer and pancreatic cancer, for instance. Right. Early diagnosis is key. It means that people will then go on, have confirmatory tests and have surgery to remove the tumour.
Yeah, just a quick question on that. Would this actually then perhaps put yet more pressure on the NHS in terms of finding those people with the disease presenting itself?
I think in a way it takes pressure off, because even though clearly it means you'll be screening a lot more, we know that the benefits of screening are that obviously people live longer because you can diagnose disease earlier, but it also takes the pressure off because it means you won't have to treat people with very complex chemotherapy and more expensive therapies. So in a way, there's a bit of a balancing act, but on balance, of course, it will mean that people will live longer, healthier lives.
Yeah, as ever, prevention better than cure. Professor Lawrence Young, thanks very much indeed for joining us and bringing us that development. Very encouraging, thank you. Now, Manchester derby, not in Manchester though, of course, down at Wembley. The FA Cup final at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Man United and Man City facing off in the capital. Of course, Pep Guardiola's team attempting the treble with that Champions League final against Inter in Istanbul just a week away. Well, let's speak now to, yes, a Manchester City fan, Paul Huckabee, and a Manchester United fan, Kieran Redmond, joining us as well. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us both at the same time. We're very honoured. First of all, have you got your coach tickets? Because I guess trying to get to Wembley tomorrow by rail is going to be impossible.
Yeah, it sounded pretty bad, but no, it's a coach and a minibus, and we'll find a way no matter what. This is so important for the city and for the inevitable victory that will be blue.
The glove or the gauntlet is down pretty quickly. Kieran, how about you? I mean, is there any chance of United and City fans travelling together to get down there?
I'm sure they will. They'll be together, and we'll have to wait and see how it goes on the train.
OK. I can imagine the buffet car is going to be quite interesting. However, can I put it to you, how does it feel to be the underdog with United having been the glory team for so long?
Well, it's theirs to lose, you know. You have to understand that. And Paul was talking. He was talking on this show, and he said if he had a choice between Champions League or FA Cup, and he chose to beat United at the FA Cup at Wembley. So that means we live rent-free in their heads, which means we have a chance. And we beat them already.
Okay, and Paul, I mean, just to remind people, this is the first time the two have met in this sort of arena.
Yeah, in the history of FA Cup, it's quite mad considering how old a tournament it is.
Yeah.
You'd expect to have crossed paths at some time. So, yeah, the feeling in Manchester at the minute is quite a good thing, right? I think both sets of fans are kind of pleased at the fact Manchester becomes the focal point once again of football, and as it should be.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what is the atmosphere going to be like? I mean, will people celebrate the football, and will there be an acknowledgement that, if, for instance, United win, dare I suggest to you, the better team will have won? I mean, is it going to be gentlemanly?
No, probably not. I doubt it. I think it's because of the treble, right? If they can defend their treble, I think you probably get a lot more Reds giving us some back in Istanbul. But for this, it's a generational thing. Times have changed a lot in this rivalry, but at the end of the day, we still kind of on Derby Day it's a different kettle. It's a different kettle of fish,
Let's just reflect that, of course, City have waited long enough for these sorts of days. But, Kieran, let's just talk about the game. I mean, sometimes the FA Cups, they don't actually deliver. It's a 1-0 or whatever. I mean, what sort of match are you expecting?
Yeah, that's true about the FA Cup. Definitely over the years. But, I mean, to be honest, United, I think a good performance. We had a good season. The start of the season, when I was watching the match with Paul, we lost against Brentford. And he was there with me that day. And he put his arm around me and he says, "You're getting relegated." And we finished third, and now we're about to win 2 domestic competitions, so we'll see.
So let's get a scoreline from both of you. Kieran, first of all, what are you looking at?
Be tight. I'm going to say 2-1. 2-1 United.
Right, OK. And Paul, your end, what are you going for?
I think if we score early, I think we'll smash them 4, maybe 5. If you look at that first half against Real Madrid, do you know what I mean? If we go in hard and aggressive and we score early, first 15 minutes, and if you notice United, whenever they capitulate against Liverpool, for example, when they fell apart, Brentford as well. So if United go down early, they could quite easily just fall apart. And the way that City are playing at the minute, the Real Madrid being an example, it could be an absolute massacre. Or I could be eating my words and then turning my phone off for the rest of the week.
Well, thank you both for joining us, and great to see you in both in such good humour. Whether that'll continue by the time you've managed to get to Wembley tomorrow with all the travel difficulties, but we wish you a safe journey and wish you a good match as well. Gentlemen, both, thanks very much for watching us on GB News. Of course, we'll have all the latest on that travel down south, the epic journeys everyone will be taking, an update to you here on GB News. Back in a moment, stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up this Friday afternoon, Boris takes matters into his own hands. He sends all his lockdown WhatsApp messages directly to the COVID-19 inquiry. We speak to a legal expert to find out what it means for the Cabinet Office, who've been gearing up for a legal battle over all those messages. Confirmed Holly Willoughby will return to present This Morning on Monday. Ahead of ITV's grilling by MPs this week, the Commons Culture Committee chair says it's protection in public service broadcasting, so it is a matter of real concern, as Philip Schofield says he's lost everything. And they're off. But so are the trains. Yes, the Derby weekend starting in Epsom, but 100,000 racegoers struggling to get to the trackside as the rail minister accuses the unions of a coordinated attempt to disrupt people's summer plans. Also coming up, blooming lovely. We'll bring you the haunting sight of the Florida ghost orchid, one of the world's rarest plants, which has burst into flower in Kew. First, bursting here with the headlines, here's Rhiannon with the latest.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2, your top story from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary is being asked to clarify why a group of asylum seekers were left on the streets of London for 2 nights. In a letter to Suella Braverman, the leader of Westminster City Council expressed deep concern that around 40 refugees were placed in the borough on Wednesday night without appropriate accommodation. The group reportedly refused to enter a hotel where the Home Office had allegedly asked them to sleep 4 per room. Around 20 people have been protesting outside that hotel this afternoon. A 19-year-old man has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 6 years in prison for planning terror attacks on the police and military. Matthew King, a Muslim convert from Essex, pleaded guilty to plotting the attacks between 2021 and 2022. His plans to travel to Syria to join the so-called Islamic State was stopped when his mother reported him to the Prevent Counter-Terrorism programme. Boris Johnson has confirmed he is sending his unredacted WhatsApp messages directly to the COVID-19 inquiry. In his letter to its chairman, Baroness Hallett, he wrote, "I'd like to do the same with any material that may be on an old phone, which I've previously been told I can no longer access safely." It comes after the government argued it shouldn't have to hand over what it calls irrelevant material. Ministers are preparing for a legal battle with the inquiry. A preliminary hearing will be held on Tuesday. Philip Schofield says he's lost everything after revelations of his affair with a younger male colleague, but insists he didn't groom him. In his first interview since leaving ITV, Schofield told the BBC he's broken and ashamed and he'll forever be sorry. He's hit out at criticism, calling it relentless, and warned of its catastrophic effect on his mind, even questioning if people want him to die. He suggests that homophobia could be behind some of the backlash.
If it was a heterosexual relationship, then, it would have been a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If it's a gay relationship, then suddenly it raises eyebrows. It's wrong. It's wrong. People do find each other attractive in different age groups. I mean, it does happen, but it's the mere fact that this is so gigantic. And I appreciate the workplace and and the history. I get that, but it's the fact that it's so massive is predominantly homophobia.
And ITV has confirmed that Holly Willoughby will return to host this morning alongside fellow presenter Josie Gibson on Monday. Rail passengers face continued travel disruption with a fresh wave of strikes today. Members of the RMT union across England have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs pay and conditions. General Secretary Mick Lynch paid tribute to RMT members, saying they're determined to keep on fighting. A man arrested following the deaths of 2 young swimmers off Bournemouth Beach has been released under investigation. A 12-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy died after being pulled from the sea on Wednesday afternoon. A pleasure boat called the Dorset Belle has been impounded and is reportedly being placed under the guard of Poole Harbour. The man in his 40s, who was on the water at the time but not known to the youngsters, had been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. A blood test that can detect more than 50 different types of cancer has shown promise in a trial involving thousands of NHS patients. The Galleri test correctly revealed cancer 66% of the time during the trial. It's also able to pinpoint where in the body the disease is coming from with 85% accuracy. The test, which is currently available in the US, doesn't detect all cancers and won't replace NHS screening programmes. And the Premier League has condemned the abuse directed at referee Anthony Taylor, British referee Anthony Taylor, after footage emerged of angry fans heckling him at Budapest airport. Taylor and his family can be seen trying to evade a mob who was shouting at him as he travelled home after Wednesday night's Europa League final between Roma and Sevilla in the Hungarian capital. A Premier League spokesperson says the abuse suffered by Taylor is both shocking and appalling. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Mark with GB News Live.
Rhiannon, thanks very much. Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, appears to have blown apart the government's efforts to challenge the COVID-19 inquiry and its launching of a judicial review. He's told the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, in this letter, he will hand over all his unredacted material directly to her. The Cabinet Office had been arguing that much of that material should remain confidential because it was unambiguously irrelevant, they said. Indeed, they've launched a judicial review next week. Mr Johnson saying he's not willing to let his material become a test case. Let's get more of our political reporter, Olivia Utley, joining us in the studio. Olivia, in terms of the political dimension of this, what is Boris Johnson up to? Is he trying to embarrass the government?
Well, it's not 100% clear. It does feel like he's mischief-making, certainly, but you can sort of understand where he's coming from. For the couple of weeks leading up to this, it seemed this whole story has felt like it's been a story about Boris Johnson wanting to cover up the messages that he sent during the COVID pandemic. He wants to clear his name, it seems, and says that, no, I'm perfectly willing for the inquiry to see everything. Now, the government seems to be digging its heels in on this because of the principle of the matter. They claim that it's nothing to do with wanting to cover up specific messages between ministers or between civil servants. It's just that they don't want to set a precedent whereby the inquiry can demand, because remember this inquiry will go on for a number of years, can demand all sorts of private WhatsApp communications about irrelevant material between senior ministers and between civil servants. So the government's saying that it's fighting the case on precedent. Boris Johnson has said, well, that's all very well, but I'm perfectly happy for them to see my messages, so I don't want the government to use my case as a test case in the judicial review. Whether or not the judicial review is going to go ahead isn't quite certain.
Right.
It sounds as though the government is keen to push ahead with it, even if it knows it'll probably lose, and even if it's completely pointless now that Boris Johnson has handed over the documents, because it wants to fight the principle.
OK, well, with apologies for the pun, I mean, we expected him to be on the run politically from the inquiry, and perhaps the assertion that he'd lost control, as Dominic Cummings, I think, described him as a supermarket trolley veering from side to side. But one assumes or infers that basically he thinks he's in the clear by releasing all this, that there's no damage to him.
Well, it seems so, yes. I mean, the other thing to bear in mind is that the COVID inquiry, as I say, will go on for a number of years. So it's not as if the material which is being submitted now will be in the public eye in the next few days or anything. It's not like there's a direct risk, immediate risk to anyone's reputation if they submit their documents now. So it might just be that Boris Johnson feels that even if at some point many years down the line he gets criticised for what's said in those WhatsApp messages, it's worth it if he gets to dig the knife in Oliver Dowden, the Cabinet Secretary. Apparently,
right.
He dislikes.
I was going to ask you, what could the political ploy be? One assumes that it would be to damage Rishi Sunak, who he's no friends with now, but you think it could be in terms of the Cabinet Office directly?
The Cabinet Office, yes. It's the Cabinet Office who is most directly implicated in that. It feels lots of Tory MPs have spoken to me and said that they think that the Cabinet Office has mishandled this situation. They claim that they didn't have the WhatsApps at one point. They then claimed that they couldn't hand them over because they were irrelevant. They then claimed they couldn't hand them over because of a risk to collective responsibility in government. Yes. They've had all sorts of excuses why not to hand them over. And obviously, Boris Johnson throwing this grenade under and handing them over himself is embarrassing to the Cabinet Office. So it might be that he's trying to annoy Oliver Dowden, which apparently they have a pretty bad relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reached the stage the dog ate my homework, didn't it? But so, excuse me, that's the politics. What about the law? Let's speak. Apologies about coughing my way through this. Joshua Rosenberg is with us in the studio. It is a bit difficult to swallow, isn't it, Joshua? Let's just sort of dial back and reflect that Baroness Hallett had Section 21 of the Inquiries Act of 2005. A failure to comply could lead to prosecution and/or potential fine and jail. Does the fact that Boris Johnson has said, here it is all there, mean that is redundant? Does it also mean the judicial review that the government was trying to put in place to stop this is also redundant? Where are we in that legal process?
I don't think it's redundant. I mean, there are all sorts of factors. First of all, Boris Johnson says, I no longer have physical access to my notebooks because they were removed from my office by the Cabinet Office. I've asked the Cabinet Office to pass those on to Lady Hallett, and if they won't, then he wants them back, so he can do that. So there's the question, first of all, about whether he is able to pass on all the material that she wants. And in the meantime, we can be pretty confident that the government is saying that if they've got something and they don't want to pass it on to her, well, that's what this judicial review is about. And as Olivia says, there is much more to this whole inquiry than Boris Johnson's emails, WhatsApps and everything else. And there is this matter of principle, which I would have thought the Cabinet Office would want to fight.
So the judicial review is effectively a blocking measure, then, in that respect, until it is established where they go from there. Stop the process until we establish what the ramifications are.
As you rightly say, Lady Hallett has powers under Section 21 of the Inquiries Act to demand documents that relate to her inquiry. She issued this notice. The government says it's too wide. They've challenged it. And while that is being discussed, then it is accepted by everybody that everything goes on hold and we wait.
Right.
So it does delay it. For how long? Well, there could be, there's maybe a preliminary hearing next week, but there could be a full hearing this month. It might be resolved even by the summer, but that's still a delay.
Yeah, and of course, Baroness Hallett indicating, it might be 2026 before she actually reports finally, which is
That's when she finishes hearing evidence.
Oh, right, before even when she reports.
She is going to do interim reports as we go along, but I wouldn't be confident this is going to end in 2026.
OK. Now, talk to us about precedent, which is something else that the Cabinet Office has been talking about. There is legal precedent in terms of case law, but this, I know it's sort of quasi-judicial in a way, but it's not actually a court case, is it?
It's not a court case, but nevertheless, judicial review is a way of challenging anybody who takes a decision in a public arena. Right. And this is clearly a public arena. It's usual for people to challenge the government by way of judicial review. You challenge a minister's decision. It's unusual for the government to challenge the decision of somebody like Lady Hallett. But it's doing that. Not unprecedented. Lord Savile, when he conducted the Bloody Sunday inquiry, he was challenged and lost. But it is perfectly possible for this to happen. There is another way. If the government had refused to hand them over, she could have gone to court. But ultimately, it's entirely accepted by everybody that if there is a disagreement as to what the law allows, well, the courts will sort it out.
Reflecting, indeed, on the Savile inquiry, one thinks that the lawyers actually will be looking at a fairly hefty payday in all this, and the clock is already running with this first process underway.
This is a very expensive process, a public inquiry. The Hallett inquiry is several inquiries rolled into one. She refers to them as
like
different
a super
modules.
Inquiry.
A super inquiry, yeah. There are lots of different inquiries, and I'm not even sure that we've heard of all the modules that she's going to. Well, I don't know. We shall see. But you know, and she hasn't started taking oral evidence yet. And one thing may lead to another, and that may lead to further investigation. She has separate teams with lawyers, with investigators. It's a lot of work, and of course, interested parties, the people who are in the frame, the people who may be to blame, they also have lawyers.
Do we expect her, though, to crack the whip and tell these legal teams, get on with it?
Because, yes. And I think she is. But, you know, if you look at the Grenfell Tower inquiry, that's taken nearly 6 years. The Bloody Sunday inquiry took 12 years, which is 5 years longer than Lord Savile thought it would take. These things do take a long time, and this one is a very, very broad inquiry. That's why she says she's entitled to all these things, and that's why the government is trying to narrow it down.
Right, you mentioned that the interim process. One of the things that people have said is very important is that the lessons should be learned and put in place if there are further pandemics. Is it likely that we'll get that before the end process and the final report?
Yes, I think so. I think she is going to prioritise the things that we do need to know first. You know, we hope we'll never be in a situation like this again. But yes, she does want to prioritise the most important aspects of it, but at the same time, the people who've lost loved ones, they want their aspect of the inquiry not to be delayed. They're unhappy about the delay that this legal action may cause. I mean, I think the hearings still go ahead the week after next, but even so, it all takes time.
Yeah. And how many of the survivors will still be with us in 2026?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. 2026. No, she knows there is a need for urgency, and she didn't want this delay.
Yeah. Joshua, as ever, thank you for taking us through, and of course we'll see what happens next week. To be continued, as they say. Now, the other continuing story, yes, ITV, and this morning, confirming Holly Willoughby will be back to present the programme on Monday morning, sitting alongside fellow presenter Josie Gibson, we're told. Well, speaking out for the first time since leaving the channel, Philip Schofield saying he believes his television career is over. In interviews with both the BBC and the Sun newspaper, he said he feels like a victim of hate, claiming he'd lost everything. Well, he has indeed been dropped by more brands in a diminishing list of commercial deals and sponsorships. Well, ahead of the MPs questioning ITV on the affair next week, the chair of the Commons Culture and Media Select Committee, said it is not a witch hunt. Dame Caroline Dinenage saying they're having to address significant matters involving protection by public service broadcasters. Well, our national reporter Theo Chikomba is outside ITV headquarters in West London. And Theo, there seems to be this double track now. There's the personalities and the show, and this growing sense of the oversight that's needed in terms of ITV as a public service broadcaster.
There is indeed. Well, we'll be looking forward to see what happens in that committee meeting next week. But in the last few days, there have been questions about who knew what and when. And of course, now we know a little bit more of Philip's side following his interview with Amal Rajan, BBC Radio 4's Today programme presenter. And he spoke about some of those things which have been in the press, some of which he wanted to clarify about when that relationship with the young man started and then he became a colleague. And of course, what then transpired over the last few questions, even just a couple of weeks ago, about what's been happening. So next, it's been turning to what's going to happen next week when Holly returns. There were questions: should she return, or how will she return, in what capacity? Well, we do know she is going to be here on Monday presenting this morning. The programme itself, though, today went ahead as normal, and the presenters did address some of what was in that interview with Philip, which was released yesterday. And of course, this is some of what he had to say in that interview, which we can show.
We were mates. You know, we around the studios, you hang out together, you know, chat to each other, that sort of stuff. And then in my dressing room one day, something happened, which, you know, obviously I will regret forever, for him and for me, mostly him. That happened maybe 4 or 5 times over the next few months, and I know it's unforgivable, but we weren't boyfriends, we weren't in a relationship. I was really in a mess with my own sexuality at the time. And it just happened.
Well, also in this interview, he did speak about the connection that he's had, particularly with his daughters in recent days. He said he hasn't been reading any of the headlines, has turned all of his notifications off, but well-meaning people who do know him, who are close to him, have been telling him about what's been happening in the last couple of days. And he said, when will this stop? And if he said he didn't have his children with him, his daughters, he perhaps wouldn't be here. That's what he said in that interview. But of course, he was also asked about whether it was grooming, as he had met his former colleague and then had an affair with this person, whether this was grooming or not, and he categorically denied that. And also, we do know that there's a barrister who's been commissioned by ITV to carry out this external investigation to find out what happened with Philip's exit, and he said he will get involved in that and take part so that the full truth can be established. So perhaps more information will come out and we'll know even more what's happened. Interestingly, though, on the topic of his friendship with Holly, he did say it sort of went downhill when his brother was sentenced, but this wasn't the case following the late Queen's funeral, which was last year. So he addressed plenty of things in there, plenty for people to think about and see whether it adds up over the next few days and hours.
Theo at Television Centre, thanks for updating us. And of course, as we say, that committee meeting, the Culture and Media Committee, to look at the issue in more detail. Coming up, they're off. But so are the trains, it seems. Yes, Derby weekend in Epsom, but 100,000 racegoers struggling to get there because of the rail strikes. We'll get the latest with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's on Epsom Downs for us.
Hello, it's another fine picture across the UK on Friday with lots of sunshine to come once again, and that fine weather looks set to continue throughout this weekend, staying dry, lots of sunshine like I said, but there will be some low cloud towards the far east at times. All this set of weather is being brought around by this area of high pressure, still centred towards the northwest of the country, and with winds coming clockwise, that's still at times bringing quite a lot of cloud across some eastern coastal parts. But back to the picture through the rest of the Friday into the evening and overnight, lots of dry weather across the country, the clearest of the skies towards the west, but we'll see some low cloud filtering in across parts of England and Wales through the night, with one or two mist and fog patches as well. But under those largely clear skies, once again it will turn quite chilly. Temperatures widely falling into single figures, even in towns and cities, but in some rural spots we could see places falling fairly close to freezing, particularly across northern parts of England. But we get off to a dry, fine and sunny start for many of us on Saturday morning. A fine start to the weekend. Any clouds should quickly lift, and that will leave a fine picture across the board, a really decent day across the country. But there will be a bit more cloud across the very far north of Scotland through the day, but even here it should stay dry. Probably less in the way of cloud down that east coast. Still quite breezy towards the south, but in that sunshine, feeling warm, if anything warmer than on Friday. So we're looking at highs 21 to 23 degrees, probably warmest towards the west. So the rest of Saturday evening and overnight, very little change really, staying dry. We will start to see some low cloud though, filtering from the North Sea across many central and eastern parts of England into eastern Scotland as well. But further towards the west again, clear skies, and under those clear skies turning fairly chilly, temperatures falling once again into single figures, with one or two mist and fog patches. As for Sunday then, more of the same once again. We see quite a cloudy start across many central and eastern parts of England and Scotland, like I said, but through the morning, that cloud really burning back to the immediate coastline. Elsewhere, central and western parts, again, fine. Lots of sunshine to come and feeling warm. It stays dry through the rest of the weekend into the early part of next week. Lots of sunshine to come and, if anything, slightly warmer.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before
and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now it's the Derby meeting at Epsom for another year, the two-day racing festival kicking off today, but concerns about what protesters may do following the chaos, of course, caused at the Grand National back in April. Well, Animal Rising's claiming it will assemble up to 1,000 protesters to disrupt this festival tomorrow, the Jockey Club being granted a High Court injunction, no less, to prevent protesters from disrupting the races. Let's get the latest with our reporter Paul Hawkins, who's on the Epsom Downs there for us in the glorious sunshine, and everyone appearing in their finery, Paul, having managed to sort of bypass that train strike, I guess, to get down there.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Mark, because we've been speaking to a lot of people this morning, and it's by no means a scientific survey, but train strikes don't really appear to be having an impact on the people that we've been speaking to. That said, we spoke to one sort of leaflet vendor, someone who's here giving out one of them, and they said that they've been here every year and it feels like the footfall is quite small. But we'll get the facts and figures through either later today or tomorrow in terms of how the cost of living and, of course, the train strikes have affected the event. In terms of the racing, we've already had one race run. They kicked off at 2 o'clock today. In fact, you can see just in the background there, one of the horses there coming round, heading towards the parade ring. And then after that, once they've some of the punters have had a good look at them and worked out which ones look like the fastest ones, then head round to the start of the track, which is all the way over there, and then they finish on the near side, which is the other side of that building, and the stables just to our left, that's where they emerge from. But yeah, the other big story as well, of course, is these protests by Animal Rising. There's an official one that's happening out the front tomorrow, a kind of alternative Epsom festival where vegan food will be sold. There will be alternative races. They're unhappy with the sport generally. We saw that at the Grand National, where there was that significant protest that disrupted the start of the National for 14 minutes. And they say that there may be some disruption as well tomorrow when the Derby gets underway just after 1 o'clock. We've been speaking to people about how they feel about those animal protests and also the train strikes, and also, let's not forget about the racing as well.
This one here, she dragged me out for the day.
I made him calm.
But no, it's something I wanted to do, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, it was definitely her idea.
Yeah, and what's so good about it?
Well, I went last year. It's just the atmosphere and everyone's having a good time. It's sunny, it's summer.
It's just an exciting weekend from start to finish, really. Meet up with good friends and have a good time.
Yeah, any top tips?
No, I usually just pick number 4 or a name. So.
What, number 4? So, but if there's not a name that catches your eye, you just go for 4?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Good Oaks, hopefully. Hopefully a good winner. Yeah, Save the Last Dance looks well. So.
Yeah. Got any good tips?
Oh, I don't. This is the man for the job, really.
Go on, then.
I don't know. There's quite a few competitive handicaps, so you'll have to see. But, I mean, wait till we know what the ground's like after the first race.
Yeah, so a lot of people enjoying the weather because this time last year it was absolutely chucking it for most of the Derby weekend. And Mark, you mentioned everyone here in their finery. I can tell you that this year there is no dress code for the first time ever, and that's because the Jockey Club want to make horse racing as an event more accessible. So they've done away with the dress code. You do have to stick to the dress code if you're heading into the Queen Elizabeth II stand just behind us, but otherwise you can pretty much turn up in whatever you want, and that's they're trying to get rid of that perception that horse racing is an elitist sport and that you don't have to fork out loads for an outfit if you want to come, which is of course very prescient in these times when there's a difficult cost of living crisis going on.
And there's you taking all the time and trouble to dust off your jacket and get your shirt and tie on as well. But anyway,
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
It does look very relaxed there at the moment. I mean, have they got more security in place, bearing in mind this potential threat tomorrow?
Yeah, there is more security in place. The Jockey Club have invested $150,000 in bolstering security, more stewards, more marshals. They've been liaising closely with Surrey Police. Every evening this week they've had security briefings. they're going for the strategy of, number one, prevention, but they admit that's difficult with this course because there are more access points compared to Aintree, where they have the Grand National, which has a large fence around the perimeter. So prevention is more of a strategy there. Here, yes, they're going for prevention, but they've also got lots of contingency plans in case there is disruption. How do they remove the protesters and any substances they may use quickly and minimise the disruption to the race? In fact, the scheduling of the Derby tomorrow takes into account not only the FA Cup final, which is later that afternoon, but also they've allowed extra time in case there is a delay to the race itself when it gets underway.
Interesting. OK, well, thank you for that. We'll let you go off and put a few bob on number 4, whatever it is. Paul, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. And we'll see if he does take up that offer or that challenge. Coming up, King Charles arriving in Romania on a private visit to, well, his favourite place in the country. We'll have the latest, but first, all the headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary is being asked to clarify why a group of asylum seekers were left on the streets of London for 2 nights. The Home Office allegedly asked around 40 refugees to sleep 4 per room in a hotel. Around 20 people have been protesting outside that hotel this afternoon. A 19-year-old man has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 6 years in prison for planning terror attacks on the police and military. Matthew King, a Muslim convert from Essex, pleaded guilty to plotting the attacks between 2021 and 2022. He was arrested after his mother reported him to the Prevent Counter-Terrorism programme. Boris Johnson says he's sending his unredacted WhatsApp messages directly to the COVID-19 inquiry. In his letter to its chairwoman, Baroness Hallett, he wrote, "I'd like to do the same with any material that may be on an old phone, which I've previously been told I can no longer access safely." It comes after the government argued it shouldn't have to hand over what it calls irrelevant material. And Philip Schofield says he's lost everything after revelations of his affair with a younger male colleague, but insists he didn't groom him. In his first interviews since leaving ITV, Schofield told the BBC he's broken and ashamed and he'll forever be sorry. He's claimed the affair has been blown up because of homophobia.
Find each other attractive in different age groups. I mean, it does happen. You know, but it's the mere fact that this is so gigantic, and I appreciate the workplace and and the history. I get that, but it's the fact that it's so massive is predominantly homophobia.
And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website gbnews.com.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, a 19-year-old man's been sentenced to life with a minimum of 6 years in prison after pleading guilty to planning terror attacks in London. 19-year-old Matthew King, a Muslim convert from Essex, pleading guilty to plotting those attacks on police stations, rail stations and a British Army barracks between 2021 and 2022. When he was arrested at his home in May and was actually sentenced today. Let's bring in our Home Security Editor, Mark White, who was at the Old Bailey for that sentencing. And Mark, we reflect maybe a lot of people thinking, what, 6 years, is that all? But this was a minimum tariff for what is a discretionary life sentence.
It is, and the judge was at pains to point out that, you know, when judges agreed to allow cameras in court, one of the things that they saw as a benefit to allowing the televising of court cases is to allow the public really to see the guidelines that they're guided by and the decisions they reach and why they reach those decisions. And we heard all kinds of aggravating factors and mitigating factors from his defence team. But in the end, he, because of the danger threshold, which he said this young man had absolutely passed, then he passed this discretionary life sentence, which allows it to be a reduced minimum term. And in this case, it'll be 6 years minus almost a year or just over a year,
3,
I think.
6, 7 days.
Yeah, in terms of the what he served on remand. But what he points out, Mark, is that is then up for the parole board to determine whether he still poses a threat and will be released. And we know from reports about his behaviour already in prison that he has not been behaving himself a lot of the time.
He threatened to behead an imam within the prison, the service. Yeah,
absolutely. He still holds this very extreme mindset, the mindset that got him jailed, obviously, in the first place.
And even if and when he's released, he will be on licence for life because the judge indicating he is a danger to the public.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that a life sentence was. That's why it's called life. Everybody gets confused because they think, but you're only passing a sentence of 6 years in this case, or, 15 years in another. But life simply means that you're on a life licence. So if at any point you then commit an offence, you can immediately be recalled to prison and you will serve the rest of your jail term.
Now, we were told in the court hearing, even though he's pleaded guilty, that police think he was literally hours away from carrying out an attack. This was not just an empty threat. And it was his mother that had alerted police so they could start surveillance.
Yeah, they said that, he had an entrenched Islamist extremist mindset, that he wanted to enact that in violent extremism. That's what his mother saw in speaking to him and the kind of things that she was being told by him. She alerted the Prevent Counter-Extremism programme, and that's unusual. I was mentioning to you before, Mark, the vast majority of those family members do not contact the authorities, whether they are concerned about their loved one's descent into extremism or not, because they're concerned about the consequences for them, what might happen to them if they're arrested and alike. So she is, the mother of this young man, is unusual, but because of that was singled out for praise by the judges.
And obviously the surveillance being carried out here on home soil, but an indication to the judge saying that, you know, he was looking at Syria and Islamic State and the acts of violence that have been going on there. There was this direct correlation.
Yeah, I mean, he was weighing up all his options. Remember, he hadn't been radicalised that long. He's one of those individuals who the police and security services had warned about, someone who was radicalised in the bedroom, on the internet, during lockdown. So he hadn't fully, I don't think, realised until quite late on what he wanted to do, but then he appears to have settled on trying to either target police or members of the military. He'd gone to the 7 Rifles barracks in East London, had been seen filming outside the barracks late at night. He'd also gone to Stratford railway station, had filmed police officers there, had gone to Stratford Magistrates Court, and again was seen, you know, looking at the police officers and apparently just scoping out that particular venue. And he also shopped online. He'd got the combat fatigues, the jacket, the tactical combat gloves and goggles. He'd also tried to procure a combat knife, but that required a passport for age verification, and he was underage in terms of being able to buy a knife like this.
And the judge certainly bringing up this issue of his age and his maturity, not that that was an excuse, but indicating, of course, that perhaps, you know, the fact that these people are easily led by these online forums.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, this is an immature, angry young man, but because he's immature, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to you know, cut him slack in that sense, because often they are more of a threat. Impressionable, vulnerable people that are susceptible to this kind of propaganda, either from jihadist groups or even on the other side from the far right. They are there, and there has been, you know, custom and practice of these extremist groups now for some time to reach out to them and try and radicalise them online and get them to do that sort of dirty work for them that no longer is really the sophisticated, multi-pronged attack. It is an individual, getting behind the vehicle, the wheel of a vehicle, going into the kitchen and taking a kitchen knife out. Very low in sophistication, but just as deadly.
Mark, thank you for taking us through that as he starts that sentence, a minimum, as we say, of 6 years, a life sentence. Now, with summer having arrived, meteorological summer at least, many gardeners anxiously waiting for their favourite flowers to come into bloom, including the haunting sight of the Florida ghost orchid, one of the world's rarest plants, flown across the Atlantic, carefully held in a passenger's lap and displayed at the Chelsea Flower Show. But conditions just too cool for it to actually bloom. But now in the toasty surroundings of Kew Gardens terrarium, it's appeared in all its glory. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba went to find out and see more for us.
Well, I'm here at Kew Gardens, where for the first time a rare ghost orchid has flowered here in the UK, and already lots of people have been here to see it. Some are saying, well, it's smaller than I expected, and others are saying, actually, this is beautiful. This is something that I have never seen when coming to see species like this. So, of course, not many of them in the world, around 2,000 of them. Of course, it is endangered. It's native to southwest Florida and Cuba. And this morning we had the pleasure of speaking to one of the experts here about the story and how it came here, and this is what he had to say.
So it flew from Chicago to the UK around 3 weeks ago, and it was carried on the lap of a conservationist from the United States to keep it safe and warm. And it has been displayed at Chelsea throughout the opening of the festival, still in bud, and it arrived here in Kew on Sunday and opened for us just yesterday. It's a very unusual orchid. It's a leafless orchid, meaning that it has just roots. So out of nowhere, you see this bloom coming out of just a massive root. It's quite unusual, and it's a very, very rare orchid. Actually, it's my very first time in my lifetime that I see the Dendrophylax lindeni in bloom, or at all, really. It's one of those plants that you always read about and you hear about it and you see picture of it, but to see it in real person is quite something. It's probably could be one of a lifetime thing. We don't know when this plant is going to bloom again. If hopefully it will grow well enough to be a regular occasion in future, but it's something definitely to come to Q4.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of interest, and there has been for most part of the morning, and likely for the next couple of days. It was at the Chelsea Flower Show, but didn't bloom there. But luckily, people have had the opportunity to come and see it here. Now, over the next few days, people will have the opportunity. It depends how happy it is and how the atmosphere in here will keep it alive. Just to give you a glimpse of how warm it is, I'd probably say 20s or maybe even 30 degrees, but it's very warm, so it's allowing this flower to be in that tropical or even weather similar to where it's native to in Southwest Florida and Cuba. But for now, people are fortunate to get the glimpse of it whilst it's still here at Kew Gardens.
There we are. Warm welcome for the Florida ghost orchid in Kew Gardens. Now, King Charles has arrived in Romania to begin a private visit to the country, receiving, though, still a guard of honour at the Tronchenio Palace before undertaking a bilateral meeting with President Iohannis, and indications, of course, that all the dignitaries are meeting him at the moment. We'll bring you those pictures as soon as they come in. But our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, joining us in the studio, because this is interesting in terms of the private visit. He's got a very simple sort of village house out there where he literally retreats. He sort of goes off grid and he paints and he gets back to nature. And one wonders if this is the first chance, maybe since the coronation, he's had to literally switch off.
Yeah, he does. He bought his first Romanian property in 2006, and it is a very simple house by Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle standards. There's no television, as we understand it, not a lot of, let's say, modern amenities, and he uses the time really to go hiking in the hills, occasionally read a book in the evening, and painting as well. We know the King enjoys painting in his free time, and of course we're only a month, aren't we? Less than a month, actually, since the coronation, so it's his chance to rest and recuperate. It certainly does, but he's had to do official elements before he goes off to his retreat in Transylvania.
I think on that respect, there's still a few official things to do in Romania, because here we are, he is meeting religious leaders and dignitaries, because clearly for Romania, you know, this is a big deal when the King comes to visit, and indications that, of course, he has a very warm welcome, too, from the people of Romania.
Yes, it certainly is. So this is a reception being held in Union Hall at the Cronceni Palace. Is it? I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's being hosted in his honour by the President of Romania, and as you said, many diplomatic dignitaries there. This is, as we understand it, the final public official engagements the King has before he travels to Transylvania, where his property is. And, of course, next week, his son, Prince Harry, we're expecting to be in the UK to give evidence in his trial against the Mirror Group newspapers. They obviously dispute the allegations, but it means there's no chance of reconciliation between the King and his son, because the King's in a totally different country.
Right. I know Queen Camilla, he is literally on his own there?
As we understand it, he is on his own. He goes there once a year, usually by himself. Camilla, as we understand it, it is like a retreat, and as we understand it, Camilla, according to the Telegraph at least, is staying in her Wiltshire property with her 2 dogs.
And a television.
And maybe a television, maybe.
But one reflects that he's still determined to do this as king. I mean, obviously he has a little more leeway as the Prince of Wales as he was to take time out and to visit these various properties he has. But he's carrying on with that tradition as king.
He certainly has. And, of course, the first foreign visit we had from the King and the Queen, of course, was the state visits to Germany and Berlin. It was thought by the Foreign Office and, indeed, Buckingham Palace that it would not be appropriate for the King's first official visit abroad to be for a private visit to a house by himself. So now that he's got the official state visit out the way, sanctioned by the Foreign Office, he has a bit more freedom in terms of where he goes and what he does. But clearly he is now head of state. It seems appropriate. Buckingham Palace believes clearly that he should do a couple of official engagements while he is there, meeting the president here, receiving this Guard of Honour, which you're seeing on your screens now, at the palace in Romania, and then, of course, the reception.
And then getting the watercolours out.
Yes,
could be better.
And the hiking boots.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that. And, of course, we'll follow those events and reflect on a bit of time out for the King. Now, to the Manchester derby, of course, but not in Manchester, down at Wembley, for that FA Cup final at 3 p.m. tomorrow, if they can all get down there with the trains not running. Yes, United and City taking on each other, well, for the first time, of course, that's reflected in an FA Cup final. And Pep Guardiola's team attempting, of course, the treble with the Champions League final against Inter in Istanbul, just a week away. Let's get the thoughts now of Chris Scudder, who's been following the season for us, of course, as well as other broadcasters. And Chris, this is a historic occasion, of course, because, as you say, the first time they're meeting in an FA Cup final.
Yeah, and the real spice to this one, Mark, is that if City can win tomorrow and the Champions League, as you mentioned, next week, they will win the treble. Only one team has ever done that before. It was Manchester United. So there's the spice. United do not want their legacy tarnished by the noisy neighbours. So they'll be doing everything they can to stop City winning the FA Cup tomorrow. And, you know, derbies are derbies because you can't really predict what's going to happen. If something bad happens in the first 5 minutes, you know, it can concede a goal. It can change everything. You know, there's Haaland, fantastic player. But if United, I'm sure, have got a game plan for him. And I think they've got a great chance. I really do. City, we know, are the best team by a mile in this country, but it's a one-off. And United, as I say, they don't want City to win the treble, so it's going to be a fascinating occasion.
And, of course, the FA Cup does throw up these surprises. I mean, sometimes one has to say, you know, not many goals in a final, but perhaps, given the powerhouse strikers they got on both sides, we may see a few more goals this time round.
Yeah, interesting also that City are playing not Edison in goal tomorrow, but Ortega, who's their number 2. He's been playing in the Cups most of the season. And Pep Guardiola, who is very scientific about these things, says he will be playing in goal tomorrow. So, I mean, maybe, should it go to penalties, and it could quite easily do so, that's how you become an instant legend, isn't it? By, goalies have nothing to lose in shootouts. Yeah. So, the biggest thing that City want really is next week. It's the Champions League. Never won it before, and the FA Cup is the thing in the middle. But they want the treble, so it's fascinating. Don't forget, these two sides have played before at Wembley in a major match. It was the semi-final back in 2011. That was the same season that City won their first title under the Abu Dhabi regime, and it was a very tense day. And you talked about security there and how people are going to get down there. It was a pretty messy day, I think. And I think tomorrow at Wembley is going to be no different. It's how people are going to get there. I'm sure people are getting there this afternoon. I would if I was going. I'd go Friday and make a day of it. But it's going to be a very tense occasion. I think that makes it the leveler, really, where City, they're the best team, but United could quite easily turn them over.
I was going to ask you about the fans, because clearly they're going to have a heck of a job to get down with no trains. We understand that the motorway service areas are being defined for the separate teams and the separate groups of fans and supporters. There is a little bit of needle between them, of course, isn't there?
I think it's an understatement, Mark. There's a lot of needle between them. I think that was a problem in 2011, as I remember, for the semi-final services, everyone coming down by road. You can imagine the tensions, and going back as well. There's no love lost. I'm sure United historically would say their major rivals are Liverpool, simply because they are the team who historically have won the most alongside them. United have won 20 league titles, Liverpool 19, City now 9. But I was up at the Etihad last week for their the day they won the day after they won the title against Chelsea, and I spoke to a lot of the older folk there. And the one thing that really struck me was that I said, aren't you bored with this? You're winning. We know you're the best team. And they said, no. We've had it rammed down our throats by United fans for decades and decades. And now, it's their time. So. Yeah. That, I think, is what makes it so fascinating.
Indeed,
There's
indeed.
a shift. I also spoke to overseas people, and they said overseas fans who traditionally support Liverpool or Man United are now starting to turn towards City. So
Interesting. Okay.
It's a historical shift, and that just ups the needle, I think.
Yeah, mad for it, as they say. Chris, thank you for that, and we look forward to an epic game, of course. Thank you very much indeed. That's it from us, but Nana's in next, sitting in for Patrick. We're back, of course, 12 noon on Monday. Have a great weekend.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with